For 20 years, my grandmother told our entire family I broke my sister's arm on purpose. Every single reunion, my sister nodded with fake tears in her eyes, while the family forced me to stand up and apologize. This summer, I smiled and agreed to do it. Then I plugged my flash drive into the new outdoor television and pressed play on the enhanced footage from that exact afternoon. By the first scream on the tape, my sister stopped nodding, and my arrogant brother-in-law realized his hedge fund was about to be seized. My name is Aaliyah, and I am 28 years old. If you have ever been the scapegoat in your own family, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe, because you will want to see exactly how I destroyed a 20-year lie in under 2 minutes. The sweltering June heat hung heavy over my grandmother Loretta's sprawling backyard in Atlanta. It was our annual Juneteenth barbecue, and as usual, the event was less about celebrating freedom and more about celebrating Loretta's absolute control over our family. More than 50 relatives filled the patio, holding plates of ribs and potato salad. The smell of hickory smoke mixed with expensive perfumes. I sat quietly at the edge of the patio, nursing a cup of sweet tea. I already knew what was coming. It happened every single year like clockwork. Loretta stood up from her custom wicker chair at the head of the main table. She tapped her silver spoon against her crystal lemonade glass. The sharp clinking sound immediately silenced the yard. Relatives stopped chewing. Children were hushed by their parents. Everyone turned to look at the matriarch of our family. Loretta adjusted her silk shawl and pointed a manicured finger directly at me. "It is time, Aaliyah," she announced, her voice echoing across the quiet yard. "Stand up and do what you are supposed to do. It is time for your apology to your sister." I looked over at my older sister, Jasmine. She sat 2 seats away from Loretta, wearing a pristine white sundress that looked entirely too expensive for a backyard barbecue. Jasmine immediately dropped her gaze and touched her right arm, practicing the victim routine she had perfected over 2 decades. She let out a soft, pathetic sigh that made the aunts and uncles shake their heads at me in disgust. "You ruined her gymnastics career," Loretta continued, raising her voice so the neighbors could probably hear. "She could have gone to the Olympics, Aaliyah. You pushed her down those stairs because you were a jealous, bitter little girl. Now stand up and beg for her forgiveness, just like you do every year. Show this family you have at least a shred of decency left in you." Before I could even move my brother-in-law, Trent decided to make his grand entrance into the conversation. Trent is a white hedge fund manager who married Jasmine 5 years ago. He constantly uses his wealth and his privilege to demean anyone he considers beneath him, and he considered me the lowest of the low. Trent chuckled loudly, taking a sip of his craft beer. He reached into his designer wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and tossed it across the table. It fluttered in the humid air before landing right next to my plastic cup. "Take it," Trent sneered, a smug grin spreading across his face. "Go buy yourself a decent dress, Aaliyah. You look completely out of place here. Jasmine tells me you are still working in some dusty basement fixing old cassette tapes for $15 an hour. It is frankly embarrassing for the family name. We have investors and politicians visiting us, and we have to explain that Jasmine's sister repairs obsolete junk for minimum wage. Just apologize to my wife, take the charity money, and try to look presentable for once." A chorus of low laughter erupted from the relatives. My own parents, David and Valerie, stood near the grill completely silent. They looked away, pretending to be highly interested in flipping burgers. They were terrified of Loretta and desperate for Trent's financial approval. They would never defend me. They had spent my entire life throwing me under the bus to keep their comfortable positions in the family hierarchy. I looked at the $100 bill resting on the table. I looked at Trent leaning back in his chair like a king. I looked at Jasmine dabbing away a fake tear, and finally I looked at Loretta, who was smiling with cold satisfaction. I did not take the money. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The scraping sound was loud against the concrete patio. The laughter died down as people waited for my usual tearful apology. I walked past the table, past the barbecue grill, and stepped right up to the massive 85-inch smart television that Trent had just bought and installed for Loretta's patio. "What are you doing?" Trent barked, his smile faltering slightly. Step away from the screen. I reached into the pocket of my jeans and pulled out a small silver flash drive. I did not fix your tapes, Trent, I said, my voice calm and steady, carrying clearly across the silent yard. I am a digital forensics expert. My specialty is recovering corrupted audio and video files that people assume are lost forever. Loretta gripped the arms of her chair. Her eyes darted toward the screen. "What nonsense are you talking about, girl?" she snapped. "Turn around and apologize to your sister right now." I ignored her completely. I kept my eyes locked on Trent and Jasmine as I plugged the flash drive into the side of the television. I picked up the remote control from the patio table. "You see," I continued, my voice rising with absolute certainty. "Grandpa always kept his camcorder running during family events. When he passed away, Loretta claimed all his old tapes were ruined by water damage. But she did not know what modern digital forensics can do. I spent the last 3 months restoring the magnetic tape from the exact afternoon Jasmine broke her arm 20 years ago." Jasmine's face drained of all color. She gripped the edge of the table tight. I just pressed play. The screen flickered for a second before the restored footage filled the massive display. It was no longer the grainy, faded memory my family had tried to bury. The enhancement made colors vibrant and the audio crystal clear. There was my grandfather standing on this very same patio, looking younger and shaking papers at my grandmother. His voice boomed through the surround sound speakers Trent installed. "I am not letting you touch her trust fund, Loretta," he shouted on the video. "I am changing the paperwork today." The camera angle was slightly skewed, resting on a patio table where my grandfather had set it down, but it captured everything perfectly. On the screen, a 10-year-old Jasmine walked out of the back door carrying a plate of food. She stopped near the top of the wooden porch stairs, looking confused by the shouting. Grandma Loretta turned away from my grandfather, her face contorted with a rage I had never seen before. She marched straight toward the house. Jasmine happened to be in her way. "Get out of my way, you stupid girl!" Loretta screamed on the tape. She raised her hands and shoved Jasmine hard. We all watched in high definition as my sister tumbled backward down the 5 wooden steps. The sickening thud of her body hitting the concrete patio echoed through the speakers, followed by the sharp, unmistakable crack of bone. Jasmine let out a piercing scream, holding her arm. My grandfather was not in the frame anymore, presumably rushing inside to call for help, but Loretta stood over my sister. She did not kneel to help her. She did not call for an ambulance. Instead, the family matriarch bent down and grabbed a sobbing 10-year-old Jasmine by her braided hair, pulling her face close. "You listen to me," Loretta hissed, her voice dropping to a terrifying whisper that my software had isolated and amplified perfectly. "You tell your father that Aaliyah pushed you. You tell everyone that little brat pushed you down these stairs because she was jealous. If you do not say Aaliyah did it, I will throw you and your worthless mother out on the street tonight, and you will have nothing. Do you understand me?" On the video, Jasmine nodded frantically through her tears. The video stopped. The frozen image of Loretta holding my sister by the hair remained burned onto the enormous screen. In the real world, the backyard was paralyzed in a stunned silence. 50 relatives stared at the television, their mouths open in collective shock. Then the silence was broken by the sharp crash of porcelain shattering against concrete. Jasmine had dropped her plate of barbecue ribs. She was standing perfectly still, staring at the screen, her whole body trembling like a leaf in the wind. All those years she had played the victim, demanding my apologies, holding that grudge over my head. Now everyone knew she had been a hostage to a lie and a willing participant in my destruction just to keep her comfortable lifestyle. The aunts and uncles who had demanded my apology just minutes earlier now stared at the ground, refusing to make eye contact with me. They muttered quietly among themselves, shifting uncomfortably in their lawn chairs. No one stepped forward to defend me. No one demanded an explanation from Loretta. They were all too dependent on her favors and her money to risk speaking the truth out loud. The hypocrisy was suffocating, but it only fueled the quiet fire burning inside my chest. You would think my parents, David and Valerie, would have rushed to comfort Jasmine, or turn to me and fall on their knees begging for my forgiveness. You would think seeing their own mother abuse one child and frame the other would trigger some basic parental instinct to protect their daughters. But that is not how my parents operate. They operate on fear and financial dependence. David. My own father lunged across the patio, knocking over a tray of deviled eggs. He scrambled behind the television and frantically yanked the thick black power cord out of the outdoor socket. The screen finally went black. Valerie rushed to Loretta's side, hovering over the older woman like a protective shield. David pointed a shaking finger at me. "How dare you fabricate this garbage, Aaliyah?" he yelled, his voice cracking with panic. "You come to this house on Juneteenth and play some manipulated computer trick to make your grandmother look bad. You have always been a sick girl trying to tear this family apart." The absolute cowardice of my parents was staggering, but it was not surprising. They were terrified of losing their allowance from Loretta and her trust fund. They were willing to look a room full of people in the eye and pretend the crystal-clear evidence they just watched was a magic trick. They chose to protect the woman who abused their child because that woman held the purse strings. They chose their comfortable suburban illusion over my proven innocence. I stood there letting my father shout his empty accusations. I did not raise my voice. I did not shed a single tear. I just looked at him with the cold realization that he was a weak man who would never be the father I deserved. I looked at my mother, who was gently rubbing the back of the woman who had terrorized our family for decades. They were pathetic. Before I could even respond to my father, Trent marched toward me. He shoved his way past my trembling sister, completely ignoring her distress. He stopped just inches from my face, using his height to try and intimidate me. He pointed his finger right between my eyes, his face red with a mixture of anger and arrogant disbelief. He was a wealthy white man who had married into a black family and used his financial status to rule over all of them. He expected me to cower before him, just like the rest of my relatives did. "You committed defamation," he sneered, his voice dripping with condescension. "You think you can use some cheap software to alter a video and ruin my wife and her family reputation just because you are a miserable failure. My hedge fund has a massive legal team that will sue your pathetic little repair shop straight into the ground." The silence following Trent's threat hung in the thick Atlanta air like a physical weight. Everyone stared at me, expecting me to crumble. They expected me to shrink back into the obedient scapegoat I had always been. They expected the threat of a massive corporate legal team to terrify a woman they believed was fixing old cassette tapes for pennies. Instead, a sound bubbled up from the very bottom of my chest. It started as a low chuckle and quickly grew into a full, loud, genuine laugh. I laughed directly in his face. My laughter echoed across the concrete patio, bouncing off the brick walls of Loretta Mansion. Trent's face twisted in complete confusion. His smug smile completely vanished, replaced by a deep, angry red flush creeping up his thick neck. He was a man who used his wealth to buy fear, and my genuine amusement was the ultimate insult to his fragile ego. "You think this is funny?" Trent demanded, stepping even closer until I could smell the expensive scotch on his breath. "You think corporate sabotage is a joke because I will absolutely destroy you, Aaliyah." I stopped laughing, but kept a cold smile plastered on my face. I did not take a single step back. Instead, I slowly reached down into the large leather tote bag resting by my feet. The relatives held their breath, probably wondering if I was pulling out a weapon. In a way, I was. I pulled out a thick, heavy legal dossier bound in black leather. I lifted it high enough for everyone to see before dropping it directly onto the center of the barbecue table, right on top of Trent Crisp's $100 bill. The heavy thud of the paperwork hitting the wood made my mother physically jump back. Repair shop, Trent?" I asked, my voice dripping with the kind of absolute condescension he usually reserved for me. "Is that really what Jasmine told you I do for a living? Or is that just what you desperately wanted to believe so you could feel superior at family dinners?" Trent glared at the folder, his eyes darting between the thick stack of papers and my face. "What is this garbage?" he sneered, though his voice lacked the booming confidence it had just moments ago. "That garbage," I replied calmly. Smoothing the front of my dress is a detailed forensic audit of Apex Capital Holdings. Your hedge fund, Trent. I watched the realization hit him like a physical blow. The angry red flush drained from his face so fast he looked like he might pass out right there on the patio. He stared at me, his jaw slightly open, unable to form a single coherent sentence. I took a slow, deliberate step around the table, forcing him to turn and face me. "Let me educate you on what my repair shop actually does," I announced, projecting my voice so every single aunt, uncle, and cousin could hear the truth. Last month, Apex Capital Holdings suffered a massive data breach. Your internal servers were compromised, and your client's personal financial data was exposed to the public. Your board of directors panicked. They bypassed standard security protocols and paid $2.5 million to an elite independent cybersecurity firm to quietly plug the leak and recover the stolen data before the Federal Trade Commission could find out. Jasmine looked frantically at her husband. "Trent, tell her to shut up," Jasmine pleaded, her voice trembling with panic. "Tell them she is making this up." But Trent could not speak. His eyes were glued to the black dossier on the table. Sweat began to bead on his forehead. "That cybersecurity firm is called Cyber Sleuth Forensics." I continued, savoring every single syllable as I spoke. "And I do not work in the basement, Trent. I am the founder and the chief executive officer. You did not hire a repair shop. You hired me, and my team did exactly what you paid us $2.5 million to do. We recovered your data. But in the process of auditing your internal servers to find the security breach, we found something else." A pin drop could have been heard in that backyard. The nosy church ladies in the back row had stopped fanning themselves. My parents were staring at me like they were looking at a ghost. I was no longer their punching bag. I was the executioner. "We found your cooked books, Trent," I said, leaning in close to him. "We found the hidden ledgers. We found the offshore accounts you have been using to siphon money from your own clients to fund this lavish lifestyle you love to throw in our faces. We found the digital paper trail of wire fraud, money laundering, and embezzlement. You are not a brilliant hedge fund manager. You are a common thief in a custom-tailored suit." Trent stumbled backward, bumping hard into the barbecue grill. "You signed a non-disclosure agreement?" He stammered, his voice barely a whisper. His white privilege and corporate intimidation tactics had completely evaporated in the brutal afternoon heat. "You cannot talk about this, Aaliyah. We paid your firm for absolute confidentiality. I will have you disbarred. I will have you arrested for breaching the contract." I tilted my head and gave him a pitying look. "Clearly they do not teach basic law at whatever expensive private college your parents bought your way into," I said. "A non-disclosure agreement is legally void the exact moment it is used to cover up active criminal activity. I am a mandated reporter under federal financial regulations, Trent. I did not just breach your contract. I completely bypassed it and handed this exact dossier over to the Securities and Exchange Commission 3 days ago." Jasmine let out a loud gasp, clutching her chest. She looked at Trent, her eyes wide with absolute horror. She thought she had married into untouchable wealth. She thought she had secured her place above me forever. Instead, she realized she was married to a desperate man who was about to lose everything he had ever claimed to own. Trent looked around the yard, searching for an ally, searching for someone to defend him. But the crowd remained perfectly silent. They respected money and power, and they were watching his power disappear right before their eyes. He looked like a terrified child. Loretta had seen enough. She saw her golden grandson-in-law being publicly humiliated. She saw the family hierarchy she had brutally enforced for decades crumbling into dust. She realized that I was no longer a victim she could control. I was a wealthy, powerful woman, and that terrified her more than anything else in the world. She needed to regain dominance. She needed to remind everyone that she was the absolute authority in this family. Loretta grabbed her heavy mahogany walking cane and slammed it violently against the concrete patio. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot, snapping everyone out of their trance. "I do not care how much money you have!" Loretta screamed, her face contorting with genuine hatred. She pointed a shaking, withered finger at me. "I do not care if you own 100 companies, Aaliyah. You do not come into my home and disrespect my guests. You do not attack your sister and her husband with these vicious lies." I turned to look at my grandmother. "They are not lies, Grandma," I said calmly, pointing to the television screen that my father had unplugged. "You know exactly what the truth looks like, and you hate it." "You listen to me, girl," Loretta bellowed, stepping forward as much as her frail legs would allow. "I control this family. I control the narrative, and I control the family trust. Your grandfather left an empire of real estate and commercial properties, and he left me in charge of every single penny. You have always been a defiant, disrespectful brat, and today is the final straw. You are officially disinherited, Aaliyah. You will never see a single dime of this family wealth. I will make sure you are written out of history." I stood perfectly still, letting her furious words wash over me. 20 years ago, that threat would have devastated me. 10 years ago, it would have made me cry. Today, it just made me smile. I picked up my plastic cup of sweet tea and took a slow, deliberate sip before looking my grandmother dead in the eye. I tilted my head slightly, locking my gaze with hers. "Are you sure it is your money to withhold, Grandma? Are you sure it is your money to withhold, Grandma?" I asked, keeping my tone completely even despite the chaos erupting around us. Loretta gripped her heavy mahogany cane so tightly, her knuckles turned pale white. She slammed it against the concrete patio once more, demanding silence from the whispering crowd. Her face was twisted into a mask of pure fury, and she took a step toward me. "Of course it is my money," she screamed, her voice cracking with age and desperation. "Your grandfather left this entire real estate empire to me. Every single property, every bank account, and every commercial building belongs to me. I built this family, and I control who gets to eat at my table. You are nothing but an ungrateful child who wants to steal what I have rightfully earned." I did not back away. I looked at her shaking hands and the sheer panic hiding behind her angry eyes. She was losing control, and she knew it. The relatives were watching her closely now, their absolute loyalty fracturing under the weight of the video they had just seen. I turned back to the massive television screen that my father had unplugged. I reached behind the heavy black plastic frame and plugged the power cord back into the outdoor socket. The screen flickered to life, immediately resuming its connection to my flash drive. "You have lied to this family for 20 years, I said, pulling the remote control from my pocket. "You framed a child for a violent crime just to protect your own image, but your manipulation goes much deeper than pushing Jasmine down those stairs. You framed me because you were terrified of what grandfather was going to do." I pressed a button on the remote and loaded the second recovered audio file. This file was different from the video. It was a purely audio recording taken from a digital voice recorder grandfather kept in his home office. The sound of his deep booming voice suddenly echoed across the quiet backyard. It was a voice none of us had heard in 10 years, and hearing it now sent a collective shiver through the crowd. "I cannot watch you destroy this family anymore, Loretta," his recorded voice declared, filled with sorrow and absolute resolve. "I have seen how you manipulate the children, how you use money to buy their loyalty and punish anyone who disagrees with you. You are turning them into greedy, hollow versions of themselves." On the recording, we could hear the sound of papers rustling, followed by Loretta shouting in the background. She was telling him he was crazy and threatening to have him committed to a facility if he tried to take her money. "I am changing the will today," grandfather continued, his recorded voice overpowering her screams. "I have already drafted the new paperwork with the lawyers. Everything I have built, every single commercial property, and every trust fund account is going into a blind trust for Aaliyah. The moment she turns 18, she is the only one in this house with a moral compass. She is the only one who refuses to bow down to your toxic games. I will not let you ruin her like you ruined the rest of them." The audio recording clicked and went silent, leaving only the sound of the wind blowing through the large oak tree in the center of the yard. I turned to look at my sister Jasmine and my cowardly parents. The puzzle pieces were finally falling into place for all of them. Loretta had not just shoved Jasmine down those stairs in a moment of random anger. She had used that horrific incident to intentionally destroy my character. By forcing Jasmine to say I pushed her, Loretta convinced the entire family that I was a violent, jealous child. She assassinated my moral character so that no one would ever believe I deserved to inherit the family empire. She turned me into the scapegoat to protect her own wealth. My father dropped his hands to his sides, staring at his mother in absolute horror. He finally realized that his own mother had sacrificed his daughters to keep her hands on a real estate fortune. Valerie, my mother covered her mouth, sobbing quietly as the massive scale of the betrayal washed over her. But Loretta did not show an ounce of remorse. Instead, she threw her head back and let out a cold, sharp laugh. She looked around the yard at the shocked faces of her children and grandchildren, her expression hardening into absolute defiance. "That audio means nothing," she sneered, waving her hand dismissively at the television screen. "It is just the ramblings of a sick old man. He can talk about drafting a new will all he wants, but talk is cheap. No one ever found that new document. When he died, the lawyers searched this entire house from the attic to the basement. They searched his office, his bank vaults, and his private files. There was no new will to be found. The original will stood and the empire became mine. You have nothing but a ghost story. Aaliyah, you cannot take my money with a broken voice recording." Her arrogant confidence was staggering. She truly believed she had won. She believed that hiding the physical evidence meant she was invincible. Trent suddenly perked up. He saw a sliver of hope that the family money might still be safe. He crossed his arms, looking at me with desperate smugness. I walked slowly to the center of the patio. I looked down at the ground, and then back up at my grandmother. "You are absolutely right, Grandma," I said, my voice projecting clearly in the thick summer air. "They did not find it in the house. Grandfather knew you would search his office. He knew you would tear the mansion apart, looking for that document. He was smart enough to know that keeping it indoors was a death sentence for his final wishes." I raised my right foot and stomped the heel of my shoe hard onto the edge of the patio dirt, right next to the massive root system of the oldest tree in the yard. I looked Loretta straight in her cold eyes. "It is not in the house," I said. "It is buried right under this old oak tree." The silence was absolute. Nobody moved. The only sound was the low hum of the outdoor refrigerator. I walked across the lawn toward the massive oak tree I had been sitting on. My future. A heavy hand grabbed my shoulder. It was my father. David wrenched me backward. His face was covered in sweat, his eyes darting frantically. "You are not taking another step," he demanded, his voice shaking with terror. "Stop this before you ruin everything." I yanked away. "Ruin everything? For who, Dad?" I asked, staring at him. "For me or for you?" He blocked my path, spreading his arms wide. "You are tearing this family apart," he stammered. "You push things too far. Grandma gave us this life. You need to let this go for the sake of the family." "For the sake of the family," I repeated. "You mean for your bank account?" I took a step closer. His shoulders slumped under his guilt. He knew. He knew. Loretta had stolen my inheritance. "You knew?" "Grandpa changed the will," I said. "You knew he left the estate to me," and said nothing. My mother, Valerie, hurried over from the patio, her designer heels sinking into the soft grass. She grabbed my father's arm, looking at me with pleading, desperate eyes. "Aaliyah, please," she begged. "Your grandmother has been very generous to us. You do not understand how hard it is to maintain this lifestyle. We had to make compromises." "Compromises!" I laughed, and the sound held absolutely no joy. "You sold out your daughter to keep living in a mansion. You let everyone treat me like a monster." My father's face crumpled, and for a split second the facade dropped completely. I tried to find it. "Aaliyah," he whispered, his voice breaking after he died. "I looked everywhere in the house. I knew he wanted to leave it to you. I heard them fighting that day too, but I could not find the papers. And then your grandmother? She offered to fund my dealership. The dealership that went bankrupt. After 6 months, I asked the one she bailed you out of so you would not go to prison for tax fraud. He flinched. I had to protect us, he pleaded. She controlled all the cash accounts. Aaliyah, if I pushed the issue, she would have cut us off completely. We would have had nothing. She paid for your sister to go to that elite academy. She paid for everything. You are asking me to destroy my own mother for a piece of paper that might not be binding. I looked at the two people who were supposed to protect me from the monsters of the world. They were not just cowards. They were willing accomplices. They had traded my future for a failed car dealership and a closet full of designer clothes. They watched me cry every Juneteenth when Loretta forced me to apologize. And they did it all for an allowance. You did not protect us, Dad, I said, your voice steady. You protected your own comfort. You let her abuse me because it was easier than getting a real job. You are just as guilty. I sidestepped him, but he scrambled to block me again. You are not digging up that yard, he yelled, his voice rising in panic. This is private property. Aaliyah, you do not live here anymore. You have no right to touch a single blade of grass on this estate. While my father and I argued, by the oak tree Trent saw an opportunity to take control. He was reeling from the revelation about his hedge fund records. His white privilege and corporate arrogance came rushing back. In a desperate wave of self-preservation, he pulled his smartphone from his pocket and held it up. That is exactly right. David Trent shouted, his voice booming across the lawn. She is trespassing. She has completely lost her mind and is threatening the safety of this family. Trent tapped the screen of his phone with violent, aggressive jabs. He put the phone to his ear, glaring at me with a triumphant smirk. Yes. Hello, operator, Trent said loudly, making sure everyone heard him. I need police dispatched immediately to the Wilson estate in Buckhead. We have a violent trespasser on the property. She is making threats against the homeowners and attempting to vandalize the estate. She is acting erratic and hostile. We need officers right now. My mother gasped. Aaliyah, look what you have done, she cried. You are going to get arrested. Just apologize and leave before the police arrive. Please do not embarrass us in front of the neighbors. Jasmine finally found her voice, pointing a shaking finger at me. You are going to jail. Aaliyah, she screamed. Trent is going to make sure they lock you up. You are crazy. You have always been completely crazy. I stood perfectly still in the thick grass. I did not panic. I did not run away. I did not beg Trent to hang up the phone. I just closed my eyes, letting the sun hit my face. In the distance, barely audible over the shouting, I heard it. The faint wail of sirens cutting through the humid afternoon air. The sound grew louder with every passing second. The wailing sound multiplied, echoing off the large suburban houses. It was not just a single police cruiser. It was a fleet of vehicles speeding toward our location. Trent lowered his phone. A smug look of complete victory plastered across his face. You hear that? Aaliyah? He sneered, crossing his arms. The police are already on their way. You played your games, and now you are going to leave this barbecue in handcuffs. I opened my eyes and looked directly at Trent. I let a very slow smile spread across my face. The genuine amusement in my expression made his arrogant smirk falter. The sirens were incredibly loud now, screaming down the main boulevard and turning onto our street. I know they are on their way. Trent, I said, my voice perfectly calm, cutting through the chaos. I took one single step closer, looking past his pale face toward the large iron gates at the front of the property. Good, I whispered loud enough for him to hear. I told them all to be here at exactly 2:00 p.m. The screaming of the sirens grew deafening as two standard Atlanta police cruisers swerved through the open wrought iron gates. Their blue and red lights flashed aggressively against the manicured hedges and the large brick facade of the mansion. The tires crunched loudly over the expensive gravel driveway as the cars jerked to a halt just a few yards away from the patio. Trent immediately puffed out his chest, acting like the ultimate savior of the day. He jogged across the grass, waving his arms at the local officers who were stepping out of their vehicles. Officers! Thank God you are here! Trent shouted, pointing back at me with a look of supreme arrogant satisfaction. This woman is trespassing and terrorizing my wife and my grandmother. She is completely unhinged and dangerous. I need her removed from this property and arrested immediately. The two local cops put their hands on their duty belts, looking past Trent toward the chaotic crowd of relatives scattered across the patio. They started walking forward, ready to de-escalate. What they likely assumed was just another wealthy family domestic dispute over a holiday barbecue. They did not even have the chance to unclip their radios. Before the local officers could take another step, a loud, heavy rumble shook the driveway. The deep, powerful growl of heavy-duty engines completely drowned out the remaining siren wails. Three massive black SUVs with heavily tinted windows rolled aggressively through the gates, moving with sharp, terrifying military precision. They swerved around the police cruisers, parking at severe angles and completely blocking the local cops in the driveway. The doors of the SUVs opened simultaneously. Men and women wearing thick tactical vests and navy blue windbreakers stepped out into the humid Atlanta air. The bright yellow letters FBI were printed boldly across their backs. The local police officers stopped dead in their tracks. They took one look at the federal agents, instantly recognized the massive shift in jurisdiction, and immediately took a step back, letting the federal authorities take the absolute lead. Trent looked back and forth between the local cops and the federal agents, his face a mask of complete bewilderment. "What is going on here?" Trent demanded, his voice losing all of its confident edge. His face was pale and his hands began to tremble. "I called the local precinct for a simple trespasser." "Who are you people?" The lead agent, a tall, broad-shouldered man with sharp, assessing eyes, ignored Trent completely. He walked straight past my frantic sister, straight past my trembling father, and stopped directly in front of me. "Miss Wilson?" he asked, his voice calm and deeply professional. I nodded my head slightly. "Agent Harris," I replied evenly. "You are right on time." My father David scrambled forward across the grass, his face slick with nervous sweat. He tried to physically wedge himself between me and the federal agent, throwing his arms out wide to defend his mother. "Wait, hold on a second," my father stammered, trying to sound authoritative but failing miserably. "What is the meaning of this? You are on private property. My mother owns this estate and everything on it. You cannot just storm in here and interrupt our family gathering without a warrant." I looked at my father with a mixture of absolute pity and deep disgust. "Dad," I said, my voice steady and loud enough for the entire yard of frozen relatives to hear. "Do you really think I just found Grandpa's old voice recorder yesterday morning? Do you actually think I spent the last few months just sitting around waiting for this Juneteenth barbecue so I could play a silly prank?" I turned to look directly at Loretta, who was gripping her heavy cane so hard her frail knuckles were completely white. Her mouth was slightly open in silent terror. "I found that digital recorder 3 months ago," I explained, watching the remaining color drain from my grandmother's face. "I found it when I was sorting through a box of old electronics that Mom dumped at my apartment." I recognized Grandpa's voice. Instantly, I spent weeks using my firm, elite cybersecurity software to painstakingly enhance the audio, stripping away the decades of background noise, until his exact words were crystal clear. I took a slow step toward the patio, locking eyes with the woman who had ruined my childhood. "But I did not come to you with it," I continued, my voice echoing in the silent yard. "I knew you would just lie. I knew you would destroy the physical evidence and call me crazy like you always do. So instead, I took the restored audio files directly to a federal judge." Loretta swayed slightly on her feet. "Grandpa real estate empire does not just exist in this city," I explained to the crowd of shocked relatives. "It involves interstate commercial properties, corporate holdings across state lines in Florida and South Carolina, and massive federal tax implications. That means your little plan to hide his true will and commit probate fraud does not just fall under local Atlanta jurisdiction. It constitutes federal wire fraud, interstate commerce tampering, and massive federal tax evasion. Agent Harris reached into his tactical jacket pocket and pulled out a folded stack of thick legal papers. He held them up high for my father and my grandmother to clearly see. We have a federal excavation warrant signed by a United States District Judge agent, Harris announced, his voice booming with absolute authority. We have reasonable cause to believe that evidence of a massive federal crime is buried on these grounds, and we are here to retrieve it immediately. My father tried to physically block the path to the yard again, spreading his arms wide to protect the lawn. "You cannot do this," David yelled, his voice cracking with desperation. "I am begging you. Aaliyah, drop this for the sake of the family. Please do not destroy everything we have." Agent Harris gave my father a cold, hard warning look that made David freeze in his tracks. "Step back right now, sir," the agent commanded sharply, "or you will be placed in federal handcuffs for obstructing an active federal investigation." My father swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping in complete defeat. He slowly backed away, retreating to the patio where he belonged. He had finally admitted that he always suspected Loretta hid the will, but he stayed quiet because she funded his failed businesses. He had sold out his own daughter for financial comfort, and now he had to watch his comfortable world burn. Agent Harris turned and signaled to the men standing by the black SUVs. 4 federal agents walked across the manicured lawn, carrying heavy-duty steel shovels and ground-penetrating radar equipment. They marched directly toward the massive old oak tree in the center of the backyard. The entire family watched in stunned, paralyzed silence. The aunts and uncles who had demanded my apology earlier were now huddled together, trembling in fear. Jasmine was clutching Trent, arm her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into his expensive shirt. Trent was staring blindly at the grass, realizing his own financial crimes were colliding with my grandmother crimes. Loretta watched the federal agents plunge their heavy shovels into the thick green grass. "Stop it!" she shrieked, her voice cracking with sheer terror. "You are ruining my beautiful lawn. You cannot do this to me. I am the matriarch of this family." But no one moved to help her. They were all too terrified of the agents methodically digging around the thick ancient roots of the oak tree. The rhythmic sound of metal slicing through hard dirt filled the humid afternoon air. For several agonizing minutes, the agents worked quickly and efficiently, clearing away the top layer of soil and digging deeper into the earth, exactly where Grandpa's audio recording indicated. The tension in the backyard was suffocating. Suddenly, a loud, sharp, metallic clunk rang out across the yard. The metal blade of a shovel had struck something solid buried deep in the dirt. One of the agents knelt down in the mud, brushing away the loose soil with his gloved hands. "We have something down here," he called out to Agent Harris. The agent reached deep into the hole and pulled out a heavy, rusted steel lockbox. It was covered in damp earth and tangled roots, but it was perfectly intact. He carried it over and set it down heavily on the grass right in front of the tree. Loretta stared at the rusted lockbox, her eyes wide with absolute sheer horror. 20 years of lies, manipulations, and stolen wealth were sitting right there in the dirt for everyone to see. She cackled, a desperate broken sound, trying to deny reality that audio means nothing. She screamed wildly. "No one ever found that new. Will, the empire is mine." I stomped my heel hard onto the ground of the barbecue patio, looking at the rusted metal box. "You are right," I said calmly. "It is not in the house. It is buried right under this old oak tree." Seeing her ultimate defeat, Loretta clutched her chest with both hands. She let out a theatrical wail, swaying dramatically on her feet before dropping her cane and collapsing onto a patio chair, faking a massive fainting spell to avoid the reality of the federal agents opening the box. My mother, Valerie, began screaming for someone to call an ambulance. She dropped to her knees beside the patio chair, frantically fanning Loretta with a paper plate. My father, David, was pacing back and forth, shouting at the federal agents that they were giving an elderly woman a fatal heart attack. He demanded they stop what they were doing and help her. Agent Harris did not even blink. He looked down at my grandmother, who was peeking through her half-closed eyelids to see if her performance was working. "We have federal paramedics stationed in the transport van," Right outside your front gates, Agent Harris said, his voice entirely devoid of sympathy. They can be here in 30 seconds if you require medical assistance, Mom. But this federal search warrant is being executed right now, whether you are conscious or not. Loretta immediately stopped swaying. Her miraculous recovery was instantaneous. She sat up straight, pushing Valerie away and glaring at the agent with pure, unfiltered hatred. The church ladies in the back of the yard gasped at the sudden dropping of her fragile old woman act. Agent Harris ignored her completely. He signaled to his team. The agents carried the heavy rusted steel lockbox across the lawn and placed it directly onto the center of the glass patio table, pushing aside a platter of untouched potato salad. The heavy thud of the metal box made the glass table shudder. The lead agent pulled a thick steel pry bar from his tactical belt. He wedged the curved edge beneath the rusted padlock that secured the latch with one sharp, violent thrust of his body weight. The rusted metal snapped. The loud crack echoed across the silent yard, making Jasmine flinch and grab Trent by the arm. Agent Harris pushed the heavy lid open. The rusty hinges groaned in protest. Inside, the box was a thick, heavy-duty vacuum, sealed waterproof bag. The agents carefully cut the top of the thick plastic and reached inside. The entire family leaned forward, instinctively, drawn to the buried secrets my grandfather had left behind. Agent Harris pulled out a pristine stack of legal documents bound by a thick blue ribbon and a heavy black leather book. He untied the ribbon and looked at the first page of the legal documents. His eyes scanned the heavy black text and the gold notary seals pressed into the bottom corner of the pages. "This is the last will and testament of Theodore James Wilson," Agent Harris read aloud, his voice carrying a heavy official weight across the patio. "It is dated and notarized exactly 2 days before his reported date of death. This document explicitly states that it supersedes and revokes all previous wills and legal directives." My father took a shaky step forward, his face completely drained of color. "What does it say?" David asked, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and terror. "Does it leave the estate to my mother?" Agent Harris turned the page. "It leaves absolutely nothing to Loretta Wilson." The agent read plainly, the entire commercial real estate empire, the liquid assets, the holding companies, and the family properties are to be immediately transferred into an irrevocable blind trust. The sole beneficiary and executor of that trust, upon her 18th birthday, is Aaliyah Wilson. Leah. The collective gasp from the relatives sucked all the air out of the backyard. My father fell backward into a lawn chair, holding his head in his hands. The empire did not belong to Loretta. The money he had been begging for, the allowance he had been sacrificing his dignity for, had been stolen from his own daughter. Loretta had been illegally squatting on my throne for 10 years. Loretta let out a guttural scream of absolute fury. "It is a fake!" she shrieked, pointing a crooked finger at the documents. He was out of his mind. He was heavily medicated. "That will is completely invalid, and I will spend every last penny I have fighting it in federal court." "You do not have any pennies left to fight with, Grandma," I said, stepping up to the patio table. I looked at the heavy black leather book sitting next to the will. "What is that?" I asked, looking at Agent Harris. The agent handed the black book to me. "It is part of the estate," he said, "which means it belongs to you, Miss Wilson." I opened the thick leather cover. The pages were filled with my grandfather, neat, precise handwriting. It was not just a journal. It was a meticulous shadow accounting ledger. I slowly flipped through the pages, my eyes widening as I read the detailed entries. "Loretta, you did not just steal my inheritance," I said, my voice ringing out with crystal clarity. "You have been stealing from this family for 20 years. Grandfather knew he spent the last 20 years of his life tracking every single illicit wire transfer you made. He realized you had been secretly siphoning millions of dollars from the commercial rent accounts and funneling them into offshore shell companies." I held the ledger up, showing the densely packed columns of numbers. He documented every single account number, every routing code, every fake vendor you created to hide the stolen money, I announced, looking directly at my grandmother. who was now trembling with actual fear. He realized you were building a secret war chest to maintain your control over this family. He gathered 20 years of federal wire fraud evidence and buried it right here to make sure the FBI could destroy you if you ever tried to touch my trust fund. The relatives began to back away from Loretta as if she were carrying a contagious disease. She had not just been controlling them, she had been systematically stealing the family legacy to buy their loyalty. I flipped toward the end of the book where grandfather had tracked the most recent transfers just before he died. My eyes landed on a very specific highlighted entry. I stopped flipping and a slow, cold smile crept across my face. I looked up from the ledger and locked eyes with Trent. Trent had been standing quietly in the background, trying to distance himself from Loretta's sinking ship. He was still banking on his status as a wealthy hedge fund manager to protect him and Jasmine from the fallout. "Trent," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet tone that made him stand up perfectly straight. 10 years ago, you started Apex Capital Holdings. You told everyone in this family that you pulled yourself up by your bootstraps and secured millions in private seed funding from anonymous angel investors. It is the entire foundation of your arrogant, wealthy persona. Trent swallowed hard, a bead of sweat tracing down his temple. "What does that have to do with anything?" he stammered. Taking a defensive step backward, I looked down at the ledger and read the page aloud. Transfer of $3.2 million to Cayman account ending in 448. Beneficiary account, Apex Capital Holdings. I closed the book with a loud snap that made him jump. Your prestigious hedge fund was not funded by angel investors, Trent. Your firm was seed funded entirely by stolen money that Loretta siphoned directly out of my rightful trust fund. Trent's face went completely gray. His mouth opened, but no words came out. He looked at the federal agents who were now staring directly at him, with intense professional interest. He realized in that exact moment that he had built his entire life on stolen federal funds. He was not just an arrogant jerk anymore. He was heavily implicated in a massive federal wire fraud and money laundering conspiracy. Agent Harris pulled the heavy steel handcuffs from his tactical belt, and the metallic clink sent a violent jolt of pure panic straight through Trent. His face lost the last remaining trace of its smug, arrogant color, turning a sickly shade of gray. He looked at the federal agents closing in on my grandmother, and then he looked at the heavy leather ledger in my hands. His prestigious hedge fund, his luxury sports cars, his entire master of the universe persona were all evaporating right in front of his eyes. Trent made a desperate split-second calculation. He lunged forward, grabbing my elbow with a tight, sweaty grip. "We need to talk right now, Aaliyah," he hissed under his breath, his eyes darting frantically toward the patio doors before I could shake him off. He yanked me away from the patio table, dragging me through the open French doors and straight into the massive chef kitchen. He shoved the heavy glass doors shut behind us instantly, muting the chaotic screaming and crying echoing across the backyard. The kitchen was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the absolute disaster unfolding outside on the lawn. Trent let go of my arm and began pacing furiously across the expensive marble tiles. He ran his shaking hands through his perfectly styled hair, completely ruining the expensive gel. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his tailored silk shirt. "Listen to me, Aaliyah," he stammered, turning to face me with wild, desperate eyes. "You are a smart girl. You are a businesswoman. I am a businessman. We do not need to let the federal government burn everything to the ground. We can handle this internally. We can make a deal, just the two of us." I stood perfectly still near the massive granite island, watching him unravel a deal. I repeated, my voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. "You want to make a deal about a federal wire fraud conspiracy that you are deeply implicated in?" He took a step closer, lowering his voice as if the marble walls were listening. "Loretta is a sinking ship," he whispered viciously. "The old bat got sloppy and she got caught. I am not going down with her. I will give you everything you need to bury her permanently. I have internal emails. I have secondary account numbers. I will testify against her in federal court. and hand over every shred of evidence the FBI wants. I tilted my head slightly, pretending to consider his pathetic offer. And what exactly do you want? In return for selling out my grandmother, I asked smoothly. Trent licked his dry lips, his eyes wide with frantic greed. I want you to destroy that specific page in the ledger, he demanded, pointing a shaking finger at the thick leather book I was still holding. Rip it out. Burn it. Throw it in the garbage disposal. Tell the agents that Apex Capital had absolutely nothing to do with her offshore shell companies. You clear my name, and I will make you a silent partner in my firm. I will give you a 20% stake in Apex Capital. I simply stared at him, letting the heavy silence stretch out. Trent mistook my silence for hesitation, and his desperation quickly morphed into something far more insulting. His underlying arrogance and deeply ingrained prejudices began to bleed through his panic. He leaned across the granite island, speaking to me as if I were a slow child. Look, Aaliyah, let us be real here, Trent said, his tone taking on a slimy, patronizing edge. Girls from your background do not usually get opportunities like this. You have been scraping by with your little urban tech startup. But I am offering you a seat at the big table. This is real generational wealth. You do not want to get tied up in a decade of messy federal probate litigation. Take the quick cash. I am offering you a guaranteed payout today. You can finally buy yourself some nice things. Maybe move into a better neighborhood. Do not act like you are too proud to take a ghetto lottery ticket when it is handed to you on a silver platter. I felt a cold, hard knot of absolute disgust tighten in my stomach. He really believed I was just an angry, bitter black woman who could be bought off with a fraction of what was already legally mine. He thought his white corporate privilege made him smarter than me, even while he was begging for his freedom. And what about Jasmine? I asked, keeping my voice dangerously quiet. She is your wife, Trent? She is Loretta's favorite granddaughter. How exactly do you plan to explain to her that you are selling out her precious grandmother to save your own skin? Trent let out a harsh, cruel laugh that echoed off the stainless steel appliances. Jasmine is an idiot. He spat venomously, his face twisting in complete contempt. She is nothing but dead weight. Do you really think I married her? For her sparkling personality? I married her because Loretta controlled the purse strings. Jasmine is a spoiled, shallow liability who cannot even balance a checkbook. The second I get my accounts cleared, I am serving her with divorce papers. I will leave her with absolutely nothing. She can go cry to her felon grandmother in a federal penitentiary for all I care. Trent was so focused on trying to belittle his wife to impress me that he completely failed to notice the kitchen door slowly swinging open behind him. Jasmine stood frozen in the doorway. The color had completely drained from her face, leaving her looking like a hollow ghost. Her designer dress was rumpled, and her perfectly manicured hands were shaking violently at her sides. She had walked into the kitchen seeking refuge from the nightmare outside, only to hear the man she loved call her a shallow idiot and admit he only married her for money. Tears were silently streaming down her cheeks, leaving dark streaks of ruined mascara across her face. She let out a small, broken whimper. Trent spun around instantly. His eyes went wide with pure terror when he saw his wife standing in the doorway. Jasmine, he choked out, his voice cracking. How long have you been standing there? Jasmine did not say a word. She just stared at him, her chest heaving with silent, devastating sobs. The illusion of her perfect, wealthy marriage had just shattered into a million irreparable pieces right in front of her eyes. Trent turned back to me, his panic now reaching a fever pitch. Aaliyah, please, he begged, ignoring his weeping wife completely. We do not have time for this drama. The federal agents are right outside. Just give me the book. Take the partnership in Apex Capital. It is the best deal you are ever going to get in your entire life. I did not look at Jasmine, and I did not flinch at his pathetic begging. Instead, I calmly walked around the granite island. I picked up a heavy crystal glass and reached for the crystal pitcher, sitting on the counter. I poured myself a tall glass of cold lemonade, Listening to the ice cubes clink softly against the rim, I took a very slow, very deliberate sip of the sweet lemonade, savoring the icy chill against my throat. I set the glass down on the marble counter and looked Trent dead in his terrified eyes. "I do not need a stake in your fund. Trent," I said, my voice echoing loudly in the spacious kitchen. I froze. "All your corporate accounts 45 minutes ago." Trent stared at me as the words finally penetrated his panicked brain. Frozen, he repeated the word, as if it belonged to a completely foreign language. "You cannot do that, Aaliyah. You do not have the clearance." I set my glass on the counter, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. "I am the sole executor of the blind trust, Trent." I explained, my voice perfectly level. "That means I am the majority shareholder of the shell company that fed your hedge fund." My cybersecurity firm had full access to the routing numbers the second I authenticated the ledger. My team locked down every single asset tied to Apex Capital before I even stepped foot on this property today. You have absolutely nothing left to offer me." Trent yanked his phone from his pocket, his fingers trembling so violently he could barely unlock the screen. He tapped frantically, opening his banking applications and corporate portfolio accounts. I watched the last remaining drops of blood drain from his face as the screen loaded. Every single account balance showed zero. The federal authorities and my legal team had frozen his entire existence. His luxury sports cars, his penthouse, his offshore safety nets were all gone in an instant. He let out a strangled, gasping sound, clutching the edge of the granite island as if his legs could no longer support his own weight. A choked, broken sob shattered the heavy silence in the kitchen. We both turned to look at Jasmine, who was still standing paralyzed in the doorway. Her perfect facade had completely crumbled into pieces. She took a slow, shaky step into the kitchen, her designer heels clicking unsteadily against the cold marble floor. "Trent," she whispered, her voice trembling with absolute devastation. "How could you say those things about me? You told me you loved me. You promised we were building an empire together." Trent looked at his weeping wife, and any remaining shred of his charming husband persona instantly evaporated into thin air. The desperate, cornered animal inside him lashed out viciously. He did not apologize to her. He did not try to comfort the woman he had married. He lunged forward and grabbed her by the shoulders, shaking her roughly. "Shut up, Jasmine," he spat, his voice dripping with pure, unfiltered hatred. "Just shut up for once in your miserable, shallow life. You have no idea what is happening right now, do you? We are completely ruined because of your psychotic family." Jasmine wrenched herself out of his aggressive grip, her tear-stained face suddenly flushed with a surge of uncharacteristic fury. The shock of his betrayal ignited a fire she had never shown before. She raised her trembling hand and slapped him directly across the face with all the strength she had left. The sharp crack echoed loudly off the stainless steel appliances and the high ceiling. Trent stumbled backward, holding his reddening cheek, his eyes wide with genuine shock. "Do not you ever touch me again?" she screamed, her voice shrill and broken. "You married me for my grandmother money. You used me to get rich." Trent let out a cruel, barking laugh, rubbing his jaw. "Your grandmother money," he mocked, taking a threatening step toward her. "You stupid, spoiled little girl. None of it was her money. Your entire life is a massive fraud. Everything you have, your expensive cars, your elite education, your perfect little suburban mansion, it was all paid for with stolen cash. You are absolutely nothing without that stolen trust fund, Jasmine. You have no skills, no intelligence, no actual worth. You are just a convenient prop. I used to keep the cash flowing into my firm." He stepped closer, leaning down aggressively into her face. "You think you are so special because Loretta treated you like a princess," he sneered mercilessly. "She only treated you like that because you were dumb enough to follow her orders blindly. You were the perfect little puppet for a criminal. You do not have a single genuine accomplishment in your entire pathetic life." Jasmine staggered backward as if he had physically struck her again. She collapsed against the kitchen counter, sliding down the smooth wooden cabinets until she hit the floor, Her designer dress pooled around her in a crumpled mess. The ugly truth was finally penetrating her thick bubble of lifelong privilege. The golden child was realizing that her gold was completely fake. Her perfect marriage was a calculated financial transaction. Her elevated status in the family was bought with stolen funds. She looked at me, her wide eyes filled with a terrifying, profound realization. "Aaliyah?" She gasped, clutching her chest as she struggled to breathe through her panic. "The broken arm." She whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "When we were kids, and I fell out of the treehouse. She told everyone you pushed me. She made you take the blame so Dad would send you away to boarding school. But I just slipped. I told her I slipped and she pinched my arm so hard it bruised and told me to say it was you." I looked down at her, feeling absolutely no pity in my heart. The incident she was talking about happened when we were 10 years old. Loretta had used it as the ultimate excuse to isolate me from the family, painting me as a violent danger to her precious golden granddaughter. My parents had blindly believed the lie. "She controlled everything," Jasmine sobbed, pulling her knees to her chest and rocking back and forth. "My whole life was just a performance to keep her happy and keep the money coming. She told me who to be friends with at school. She told me to marry Trent because he looked good on paper and would handle the investments. She said if I just played my part, we would be set for life. I did not know she was stealing from you, Aaliyah. I swear I did not know she was a criminal. My entire existence is a manipulated lie." Trent scoffed loudly, rolling his eyes in absolute disgust. "Save the tears, Jasmine," he growled, pacing back toward the window. "She is not going to help you. The FBI is out there right now tearing up the yard and bagging the evidence. We are all going down. I am going to federal prison because of your grandmother." Jasmine scrambled across the cold marble floor, crawling toward me on her hands and knees in an act of total desperation. She reached out and grabbed the hem of my jeans, her manicured fingers digging deep into the denim fabric. "Aaliyah, please," she begged, her voice rising in a hysterical pitch. "You have to protect me. You are my sister. We share the same blood. I am a victim too. Trent used me for access. Grandma manipulated me since I was a child. I have nothing now. Trent is going to divorce me and leave me with his massive debts. The feds are going to take my house and my cars. Please, Aaliyah, you have all the money now. You control the entire trust. You can make this nightmare stop. Tell the federal agents I had nothing to do with it. Give me enough cash to start over somewhere else. Please just protect me from him and from the police." I looked down at the weeping, trembling woman groveling at my feet. This was the exact same sister who had mocked my clothes for years. The same sister who had called me crazy just 10 minutes ago on the patio. The same sister who had spent 2 decades basking in the warm glow of my stolen inheritance while I was treated like an outcast. She had happily worn the crown that Loretta purchased with my stolen future. I slowly reached back for my crystal glass of cold lemonade resting on the granite counter. The ice cubes clinked softly against the glass as I picked it up. I took a very slow, deliberate sip, letting the sweet and sour liquid soothe my dry throat. The silence in the kitchen was absolute, broken only by Jasmine, pathetic gasping sobs, and the distant muffled shouts of the federal agents securing the backyard. I looked coldly at my sister, feeling completely detached from her misery. The empathy I might have once had for her had been burned out of me a long time ago. I gently pulled my leg back, forcing her frantic fingers to let go of my jeans. "You nodded every year when they forced me to apologize," I said, my voice flat and icy. "You do not get my protection now." Jasmine let out a gut-wrenching wail and buried her face in her hands, sobbing uncontrollably on the kitchen floor. I stepped around her crumpled designer dress without a single ounce of hesitation. My eyes fixed on the heavy glass doors leading back to the patio. The chaos outside had not died down. It had only amplified. But before I could push the door open, my path was violently blocked. My father David and my mother Valerie shoved their way into the kitchen, slamming the glass doors shut behind them, blocking out the shouts of the federal agents. They looked like 2 desperate trapped animals. My mother's face was flushed, a deep splotchy red, and her expensive silk blouse was wrinkled from her frantic pacing outside. My father was breathing heavily, his fists clenched at his sides. They looked at Jasmine weeping on the floor, and then glared at me with an entitlement that completely defied reality. "Ah, Aaliyah, what is wrong with you?" Valerie demanded, her voice shrill and trembling with absolute panic. "Look at your sister. Look at what you are doing to this family. You need to go out there right now and tell those federal agents. There has been a massive misunderstanding. Tell them you made a mistake with the audio files. Tell them you are dropping the charges and calling off this entire ridiculous circus." David took a step forward, trying to puff out his chest and project the parental authority he had completely surrendered to Loretta decades ago. "You listen to your mother, Aaliyah." He ordered, his voice tight with pure desperation. "You are going to walk out there and fix this mess. We are your parents. We are your blood. You do not get to destroy our lives out of petty revenge. You must respect your elders and protect your family." I stared at the two of them, feeling a deep, profound sense of revulsion. They were not looking at a daughter. They were looking at a human shield. They expected me to jump in front of a federal investigation to save the very people who had systematically destroyed my youth. "Respect my elders." I repeated the words slowly, tasting the absolute poison in them. "You want me to respect the people who sold me out for a monthly allowance? You want me to honor the blood we share when you have treated me like a disposable burden? My entire life." Valerie crossed her arms defensively, trying to maintain her moral high ground. "We did the best we could," she insisted, her voice dripping with toxic self-pity. "We gave you a roof over your head and food to eat. We raised you. Aaliyah, you owe us your loyalty. Family protects family, no matter what." I let out a cold, sharp laugh that made my father flinch. "You do not know the first thing about protecting family," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet tone. "You only use the word blood when you want to bleed me dry. You want to talk about family loyalty. Mom, let us talk about my college fund." Valerie's eyes darted away instantly, the color draining from her cheeks. She knew exactly what I was about to say, and the sudden shame made her take a heavy step backward. "Do not pretend you forgot," I pressed, taking a step toward her, forcing her to look at me. "When I was 17, I worked 30 hours a week after school, waiting tables and scrubbing floors at the diner down the street. I came home smelling like grease and bleach every single night. I saved every dollar I made in a joint bank account because I was legally required to have your name on it. Until I turned 18. I had exactly $12,000 saved up to pay for my freshman year at the state university. It was my escape plan. My only chance at a real independent future." My father looked in the floor, refusing to make eye contact. He had known about it too. He had just looked the other way because confronting his wife was too difficult. "I came home one afternoon to pay my tuition deposit," I continued, the memory burning hot and clear in my mind. "And the account balance was zero. $12,000 vanished in a single afternoon. And when I confronted you, Mom, do you remember what you told me?" Valerie swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the kitchen counter. "I told you we needed it for a family emergency," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the hum of the refrigerator. "No," I snapped, cutting through her pathetic revisionist history. "You did not say it was an emergency. You told me that Jasmine was getting married to Trent, and Loretta demanded a spectacular wedding to impress Trent's wealthy parents. You told me that my little state college dreams could wait a year, because Jasmine absolutely needed a $12,000 custom designer wedding dress from Paris. You literally stole my entire future, my blood, sweat, and tears to buy a dress your golden child wore for exactly 6 hours." Jasmine, crying on the floor, suddenly stopped, her head snapping up to look at our mother. "You bought my dress with Aaliyah money," Jasmine gasped, fresh horror washing over her tear-stained face. "You told me Grandma paid for that dress. You told me Grandma imported it for me." Valerie waved her hand frantically, trying to dismiss the horrific revelation. "It was a loan," she stammered, her eyes darting frantically between me and Jasmine. "I was going to pay you back. Aaliyah, you know I was going to pay you back." Eventually, the wedding just went over budget. 5 years, Mom! I shouted, the raw anger finally breaking through my carefully maintained calm. 5 years passed, and you never gave me back a single dime. I had to forfeit my enrollment. I had to work 2 full-time jobs for 3 more years just to afford community college night classes, while you sipped champagne at the country club and bragged about Jasmine, perfect marriage you stole from me to buy her love, and now you have the absolute audacity to stand in this kitchen and demand my protection because we share the same blood. My father raised his hands in a placating gesture, his desperation making him utterly foolish. Aaliyah, that is in the past, he pleaded, taking a step toward me. We can make it right now. Loretta has money tucked away in private accounts. We can compensate you for the college savings. We can give you whatever you want. Just go outside and stop those agents before they arrest my mother and ruin our reputation permanently. I looked at my father, feeling nothing but complete and utter disdain. There is no reputation left to ruin. Dad, I said, my voice dead cold. The FBI is outside bagging 20 years of wire fraud evidence. Trent hedge fund is completely frozen, and Loretta is about to spend the rest of her miserable life in a federal penitentiary. There is no amount of money you can offer me to stop this train. It is already crashing. Valerie let out a desperate, high-pitched sob, lunging forward to grab my hands. Please, Aaliyah, she begged, her fingers digging frantically into my skin. You are destroying us. Where are we supposed to live? What are we supposed to do? We have nothing without her money. I firmly pulled my hands out of her grasp, smoothing down my shirt. You will have to do what you told me to do. When you stole my college fund, I replied evenly. You will just have to figure it out. I turned my back on my weeping parents and my shattered sister and walked out the glass doors back onto the patio. The humid afternoon air was thick with tension. Local police officers were establishing a wide perimeter, keeping the terrified relatives contained near the pool area, while federal agents continued pulling evidence from the rusted lockbox. Loretta was slumped in a patio chair flanked by 2 agents, waiting for the inevitable moment. They would read her rights. As I stepped down onto the grass, the side gate of the backyard swung open. A man wearing a plain gray suit and carrying a thick brown leather briefcase walked calmly through the perimeter. The local police did not stop him. They simply checked his credentials and pointed him directly toward me. He walked across the lawn, navigating around the massive piles of dirt the FBI had excavated from the oak tree. He stopped directly in front of me and opened his briefcase, pulling out a thick, heavy stack of manila folders sealed with red legal tape. Aaliyah Wilson. The man asked, his voice professional and entirely detached from the madness surrounding us. I nodded, extending my hand to take the heavy stack of folders. Yes, that is me, I replied, feeling the satisfying weight of the documents in my grasp. The man handed them over and gave a crisp, brief nod. You have been officially served, Miss Wilson, he said before turning around and walking back toward the gate. I looked down at the thick stack of legal documents, letting a small, genuine smile touch my lips. Right on time, I whispered to myself. The man in the gray suit walked away, leaving me standing in the thick summer grass with the heavy stack of manila folders. The federal agents were still methodically cataloging the evidence from the rusted lockbox, their radios crackling softly in the humid air. I turned around and faced the patio, where my family was huddled together like frightened animals. The loud, arrogant bravado they had all displayed just an hour ago was completely gone, replaced by a suffocating, terrible silence. I walked slowly across the ruined lawn, my shoes stepping over the massive piles of dark earth the FBI had dug up around the oak tree. The sun was beating down on the backyard, but the atmosphere on the patio felt ice cold. My father, David, watched me approach, his eyes darting nervously to the folders in my hands. His chest was heaving and beads of sweat were dripping down his forehead, ruining his perfectly manicured country club appearance. My mother, Valerie, stood right behind him, clutching his arm, her knuckles white with tension. She looked at me, not as a daughter, but as a terrifying threat. she could no longer control, the same woman who had demanded, "I apologize to my abusers," was now trembling in fear of what I held in my hands. I stopped at the edge of the patio, the glass table between us still holding the broken rusted lockbox and the truth about my grandfather empire. I lifted the first manila folder from the stack and held it out toward my father. He hesitated, staring at the thick brown paper as if it were coated in poison. "Take it, Dad," I said, my voice perfectly calm and devoid of any emotion. "It has your name on it." His trembling hand reached out and took the folder. I pulled the second one from the stack and handed it to Valerie, who snatched it away from me with a defensive jerk of her shoulders. Finally, I walked around the table toward the patio chair where Loretta was still putting on her pathetic performance. She was slumped back against the cushions, her eyes half closed, pretending to be on the verge of a massive medical crisis, while the federal agents ignored her completely. I did not bother handing it to her gently. I simply dropped the third thick folder directly onto her lap. The heavy thud made her eyelids flutter, but she stubbornly maintained her fragile old woman act. "What is this, Aaliyah?" my father asked, his voice cracking as he fumbled to open the cover of the folder. He flipped to the first page, and his eyes scanned the bold black text printed at the very top of the legal document. I watched the exact moment his brain comprehended the legal terminology. His shoulders dropped, as if a physical weight had just crushed him, and his breathing hitched violently. Valerie ripped her folder open and let out a sharp, hysterical gasp, her hands shaking so badly the papers rustled loudly against each other. "This cannot be right," she stammered, looking up at me with wild, desperate eyes. "You cannot do this to us. We are your parents. This is our home." "It is a 30-day eviction notice," I announced, my voice carrying effortlessly across the silent backyard, reaching the ears of every single frozen relative standing near the pool. As of 9 o'clock. This morning, a federal judge officially authenticated grandfather original will. The blind trust has been fully activated, and as the sole executor and primary beneficiary, I now hold the legal deed to every single piece of residential and commercial real estate in the Wilson portfolio. And that includes this massive estate you have been living in. You have exactly 30 days to pack up your designer clothes, your expensive shoes, and whatever dignity you have left, and vacate my property. I continued, looking directly into my father, terrified eyes. "If you are not gone by the end of the month, I will have the local sheriff department physically remove you from the premises and dump your belongings on the curb." Valerie let out a loud, gut-wrenching sob, dropping the folder onto the patio stones. "You are a monster!" she shrieked, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "Where are we supposed to go?" "Aaliyah. We have lived in this mansion for 2 decades. All of our friends are in this neighborhood. Our entire life is here. You cannot just throw your own mother and father out on the street like garbage. It is completely inhumane." "Inhumane," I repeated, stepping closer to her, the anger I had buried for years finally rising to the surface. "You want to talk about inhumane, Mom? Let us talk about the apartment I lived in during my sophomore year of college. The one with black mold growing up the walls and a broken heater in the middle of winter. I called you begging for just $200 so I could buy groceries and pay my electric bill. And you told me you could not help me because you had just bought a brand new luxury SUV. You left me to freeze and starve while you hosted lavish dinner parties in this exact backyard. You watched me struggle every single day while you spent stolen money on country club memberships and spa retreats. You did not care if I was homeless. Then so do not expect me to care if you are homeless now." David took a weak step forward, putting his hands up defensively. "Aaliyah, please," he begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "We made mistakes. We know we made mistakes, but we are family. You do not have to do this. You have millions of dollars now. You have the entire commercial empire. You do not need this house. Let us stay. Please just let us keep the house." "You do not get to keep the spoils of a stolen empire, Dad," I replied coldly, staring at the man who had sold me out for an allowance. You enabled a criminal. You watched your mother steal my inheritance, and you stayed silent because you liked driving luxury cars and living in a mansion you did not earn. You traded your daughter's future for your own comfort. And now the rent is finally due. You have 30 days to get out. The relatives watching from the edge of the yard began whispering frantically among themselves, realizing that the endless well of Wilson money had just dried up completely. The aunts and uncles who had always treated me like an outcast were now looking at me with terrified respect. Realizing I was now the sole owner of the entire family legacy, suddenly, the sound of a harsh, raspy laugh cut through the tension on the patio. Everyone turned to look at the chair where Loretta had been playing dead. The fragile, sick old woman routine evaporated in an instant. Loretta opened her eyes completely. They were not glazed or weak. They were burning with sharp, intense malice. She sat up perfectly straight, pushing her heavy cane aside as if she did not need it at all. Her miraculous recovery from her fainting spell was immediate and entirely shameless. She reached down and picked up the eviction notice from her lap, glancing at it with a sneer of pure disgust. Before tossing it onto the glass table, she looked at the federal agents securing the yard, and then she locked her dark, cold eyes on me. She did not look defeated. She looked like a venomous snake preparing to strike. One last time, she slowly unclasped her expensive leather purse resting on the table next to her. She reached her wrinkled hand deep inside the designer bag and pulled out a single folded piece of heavy parchment paper. She held it up between her fingers, a wicked, triumphant smile stretching across her face. "Nice try, Aaliyah." Loretta spat, her voice loud and steady, echoing with cruel authority across the patio. "But you signed your rights away to me on your 18th birthday. I have the contract right here, your corporate office." Trent stared at the massive outdoor television, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. But no words came out. The bright red numbers of the IP address reflected in his terrified eyes. He took a stumbling step backward, shaking his head wildly in absolute denial. "That is a lie," he shouted, his voice cracking as he pointed a trembling finger at the screen. "She hacked my network. She is trying to frame me. I am a respected financial manager. I have a sterling reputation in the corporate world. You cannot possibly believe the word of this bitter little girl over a man of my standing." He turned to Agent Harris, trying to summon every single ounce of his white corporate privilege. He stood up straighter, puffing out his chest and attempting to look like the wealthy master of the universe. He always pretended to be officer. "You need to arrest her for cyber terrorism," Trent demanded, his voice dripping with arrogant entitlement. "She obviously manipulated those digital records. She breached my highly secure firm network to plant fake evidence because she is jealous of my success. This is a textbook case of corporate espionage." Agent Harris did not even blink. He just stared at Trent with a look of profound professional boredom. "Sir, I strongly suggest you remain silent," the agent said, his deep voice cutting through Trent. "Frantic lies. You are currently the target of an active federal wire fraud investigation, and everything you are saying is only making it worse." "I did not even need to hack your network, Trent," I said calmly, my voice pulling his panicked attention back to me. "You were so unbelievably arrogant that you did not even try to hide your digital tracks. You thought you were completely untouchable because you wore a custom suit and worked in a glass high-rise. You logged into your own personal administrative terminal at Apex Capital Holdings to digitally splice my signature onto that fraudulent contract. You used your own corporate credentials on a Tuesday afternoon while sitting at your desk." Trent's face went from pale gray to a sickening shade of purple. "Nobody is going to believe this garbage," he spat venomously. "I am the founder and CEO of my firm. I own the board. I control the narrative. You are nothing but an angry, petty woman trying to tear down a successful man." I smiled, a very slow, very cold smile. "You are right about one thing, Trent," I said smoothly. You did have a board of directors. I tapped the screen of my silver iPad twice. The massive outdoor television flickered, and the image of the digital forgery was instantly replaced by a high-definition video conference grid. 12 distinct video feeds popped up on the screen, showing 12 incredibly furious men and women sitting in various high-end corporate offices across the country. It was the entire executive board of directors for Apex Capital Holdings. Trent physically recoiled, his hands flying up to his head in pure disbelief. "What is this?" he gasped, staring at the faces of his most important investors and partners. "What are you doing?" "Good afternoon, board members," I said, my voice echoing across the silent patio. "My name is Aaliyah Wilson. As the primary cybersecurity consultant providing the digital forensic evidence you requested, I can confirm that the data packets I transmitted to your legal team this morning are entirely accurate." The chairman of the board, an older man with silver hair and a terrifyingly stern expression, leaned forward into his camera. His eyes were locked entirely on Trent, and the disgust in his gaze was absolutely lethal. "We have received the files, Miss Wilson," the chairman said, his voice heavy with fury, "and we have been watching this entire pathetic display on a secondary feed for the last 20 minutes. Trent scrambled toward the television, holding his hands out in a desperate, pleading gesture. "Arthur, please, you have to listen to me," Trent begged, his voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "This is a family dispute. She is crazy. She is trying to ruin my life because she is jealous of my marriage. Do not let her manipulate the firm. I built this company from the ground up." "You built this company on stolen federal funds," Arthur snapped, cutting Trent off completely. "You told this board that our seed money came from anonymous angel investors. But the digital ledger Miss Wilson provided proves that you funneled $3.2 million of stolen commercial real estate assets through offshore shell accounts directly into our primary operating fund. You used our firm to launder stolen money." "Trent, it was a loan," Trent screamed desperately, his carefully constructed wealthy persona completely shattering into a million pieces. "I was going to pay the trust back. My grandmother-in-law just needed a secure place to hold the assets. I was managing the portfolio. Arthur, I was protecting our interests. I am a visionary. You need me." "You are a liability," Arthur replied coldly, his voice echoing through the speakers, like a judge handing down a life sentence. "Your actions constitute massive federal fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy. You have exposed this entire board to SEC investigations and federal indictments." Trent grabbed his own hair, pulling at it frantically. "You cannot do this to me," he wailed. "I am the CEO. I hold the majority equity. I am the face of Apex Capital. You people are nothing without my connections." "Not anymore," Trent Arthur said, checking a document on his desk. "As of 5 minutes ago, the board held an emergency vote. You are terminated as CEO, effective immediately. Your corporate access has been completely revoked. Your equity shares have been frozen, pending seizure by the federal authorities, and we have already handed over all of your internal communications to the Securities and Exchange Commission." "No!" Trent shrieked, dropping to his knees on the patio stones, begging the digital faces on the screen. "Please, I have a family. I have a reputation. You are taking everything I have worked for. You cannot leave me with nothing." "The board has completely severed all ties with you, Mr. Blackwood," Arthur said, his voice completely devoid of mercy. "My advice to you is to find a very good criminal defense attorney." The screen went completely black as the video call disconnected, leaving Trent staring at his own dark reflection in the glass. Trent knelt on the cold stone, the absolute reality of his situation crashing down upon him. His prestigious career was dead. His millions of dollars in stolen equity were frozen. His corporate empire had publicly disowned him, and the FBI agents were standing just a few feet away, holding the rusted lockbox that contained the evidence that would send him to federal prison for a very long time. He had lost absolutely everything in the span of 5 minutes. He slowly pushed himself up from the ground, his entire body trembling violently. He did not look at his weeping wife Jasmine, who was still huddled on the kitchen floor inside. He did not look at the federal agents, who were now taking slow, deliberate steps toward him. He turned his head and locked his bloodshot, unhinged eyes directly on me. The sheer, overwhelming arrogance that had fueled his entire life suddenly morphed into a dark, violent rage. His face twisted into a grotesque mask of pure hatred. His chest heaved as a primal, guttural scream ripped from his throat. He lunged forward, his hands outstretched like claws flying across the patio, stones entirely consumed by the violent urge to destroy the woman who had just burned his entire life to ash. The sudden movement was a blur of expensive fabric and primal rage. Trent closed the distance between us in a fraction of a second, his perfectly manicured hands curling into tight fists, aiming directly for my throat. I did not flinch. I did not even take a step back because I knew exactly how pathetic and weak he truly was beneath his polished veneer. But before his hands could even graze the collar of my shirt, a completely unexpected force slammed into him from the side. David, my father, the man who had spent his entire adult life cowering behind his mother and bending to the will of anyone with a louder voice, suddenly launched himself across the patio. He hit Trent with the full weight of his body, the impact sounding like a wet sack of cement dropping onto the expensive stone pavers. Trent let out a sharp, breathless wheeze as the air was knocked completely out of his lungs, his eyes going wide with shock as he was thrown off his feet. The two men crashed onto the ground in a tangled mess of tailored suits and pure desperation. Trent thrashed wildly, throwing clumsy, panicked punches that landed harmlessly against my father's shoulders. But David did not back down. For the first time in his miserable passive existence, my father actually fought back. He threw his weight over Trent, pinning the younger man against the hard ground, his face turning a deep shade of crimson as he struggled to keep Trent restrained, holding him down with a strength I never knew he possessed. "Stay down!" David yelled, his voice cracking with a mixture of adrenaline and years of suppressed rage. "Do not you dare touch my daughter!" I stood perfectly still watching the bizarre scene unfold at my feet. My father's chest heaved as he pressed his forearm against Trent, collarbone holding him flat against the stone. Trent was kicking and squirming, spitting curses and pathetic threats. But the fight had already left him. He was nothing but a cornered animal, realizing there was no way out of the trap he had built for himself. He was thrashing just to thrash, knowing his corporate kingdom was already burning to the ground. David looked up at me from the ground, his breathing ragged and his hair falling in messy gray strands across his sweaty forehead. His eyes were wide and filled with tears pooling at the corners and spilling over his cheeks. He looked at me with an expression of such desperate, pathetic hope, it was almost hard to witness. He truly believed that this single moment of physical intervention was enough. He thought that throwing himself in front of a ruined, disgraced man would somehow magically erase 20 years of systematic neglect and emotional abandonment. I saw it all written clearly in his tearful eyes, the desperate plea for redemption, the silent begging for a clean slate. He wanted me to look down at him and see a protector, a hero, a real father who was willing to put himself on the line to keep his child safe. He wanted this one physical tackle to wash away the memory of him looking the other way while my college fund was stolen. He wanted this to fix the years he spent prioritizing his country club status and his comfortable allowance over my basic survival. "Are you okay, Aaliyah?" My father gasped, his grip tightening on Trent's jacket as he looked up at me like a dog waiting to be praised. "I got him. I will not let him hurt you. I am here." I looked down at the man who shared half my DNA, feeling absolutely nothing. No gratitude, no sudden rush of familial love, not even a flicker of relief. The gesture was so incredibly hollow, so entirely too late that it only magnified the tragedy of our entire relationship. He was only acting like a father now, because it was convenient. Now that the money was gone and the illusion of his perfect life was shattered, he finally found the courage to stand up to the people who had controlled him, because he had absolutely nothing left to lose. Before I could even process the absurdity of his expectation, the federal agents flooded the patio. Agent Harris stepped forward with terrifying speed and efficiency, his heavy tactical boots hitting the stone right next to my father. "Head, step away from him." "Mr. Wilson," Agent Harris commanded, his voice, leaving absolutely no room for negotiation. "We will take it from here." My father hesitated for a fraction of a second, still looking up at me, hoping for a word of validation, a thank you, an acknowledgement of his grand sacrifice. When my face remained a mask of cold indifference, he slowly released his grip and scrambled off of Trent, crawling backward on his hands and knees to give the federal agents the space they needed. Two agents hauled Trent roughly to his feet, spinning him around and slamming him face first against the nearest stone pillar of the patio bar. The metallic click of handcuffs echoed sharply in the quiet yard, cutting through the humid summer air like a gunshot. Trent did not even try to fight them anymore. His entire body went limp, his custom designer suit covered in dirt and patio dust, his face pressed against the cold stone as Agent Harris stepped up right behind him, securing the metal cuffs tightly around his wrists. "Trenton Blackwood," Agent Harris said, his voice booming across the silent yard. "You are under arrest for assault, battery, federal wire fraud, money laundering, and criminal conspiracy to commit corporate espionage. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Trent let out a hollow, broken sob as the cuffs clicked shut. His legs gave out slightly, and the agents had to hold him up by his arms. The arrogant, untouchable CEO was completely gone, replaced by a ruined criminal who was about to spend the best years of his life in a federal penitentiary, his white privilege and corporate connections failing him completely in the face of undeniable digital proof. Jasmine was still huddled on the kitchen floor, staring through the glass doors, her makeup completely ruined by her tears. She watched her perfect, wealthy husband being dragged away in handcuffs, and she did not move a single muscle to help him. The fairy tale she had bought with my stolen money was officially over. She just sobbed quietly, wrapping her arms around her knees. The local police officers parted ways to let the federal agents drag Trent through the perimeter. The absolute humiliation of his perp walk was witnessed by every single aunt, uncle, and cousin who had previously worshipped the ground. He walked on. Trent dragged his expensive leather shoes through the dirt, his chest heaving with uncontrolled sobs as the reality of his ruined life finally crushed whatever remaining ego he had left. He tried to look back at the house one last time, but Agent Harris shoved him forward, firmly guiding him out of the yard and toward the waiting federal vehicles parked out front. David stood up slowly, brushing the dirt off his expensive trousers. His chest was still heaving from the adrenaline. He took a tentative step toward me, reaching out a trembling hand as if he expected me to fall into his arms. His tear-stained eyes searched my face, desperate for the forgiveness he thought he had just earned by playing the protector. "Aaliyah," he whispered, his voice breaking with emotion. "I protected you." I stopped him. "I will always protect you from now on. I promise." I looked at my father, watching the hope slowly die in his eyes. As my expression remained completely unchanged, I did not feel anger anymore. I just felt a profound, exhausting emptiness. Looking at this man who had failed me in every conceivable way. Tackling a broke man does not make you a father. "Dad," I said, my voice flat and completely devoid of warmth, "you did not protect me from anything. You just wanted to feel like a hero for 5 seconds, because you know you have been a coward for my entire life." My father's outstretched hand dropped slowly to his side, his shoulders slumping as the last bit of fight drained out of his body. He looked like an empty shell of a man standing amidst the ruins of a life he had never actually earned, watching the ultimate collapse of the Wilson Empire in terrified silence. David backed away, his head bowed low, unable to look me in the eye. The FBI agents continued their work, securing the patio and directing the local police to clear out the remaining guests who had been hovering near the pool. This was supposed to be Loretta's grand, triumphant afternoon, a sprawling, lavish barbecue designed to cement her status as the absolute matriarch of our community. And to do that, she had invited the most powerful social currency she knew, the senior elders of First Monumental Baptist Church. For the past hour, a group of 5 elderly women dressed in their immaculate Sunday best had been sitting under the large white canopy tent near the edge of the lawn, watching the entire catastrophic unraveling of the Wilson family. They were the mothers of the church, women who possessed the kind of quiet, absolute authority that could make or break a family reputation in our community. With a single whispered conversation, Loretta had spent 40 years kissing up to them, donating stolen money to their building funds, and hosting their auxiliary meetings right here on this patio just to secure her spot at the top of their social hierarchy. She had bought their respect with checks funded by my grandfather, hard work, and sustained it by stealing my future. She paraded her false piety around every single Sunday, wearing custom hats and sitting in the front pew, pretending to be a paragon of Christian virtue, while secretly hoarding the assets of her own blood relatives. Now Sister Beatrice, the head of the elder board, slowly stood up from her white folding chair. She smoothed down the front of her tailored lavender suit and adjusted her matching wide-brimmed hat. Her face was a mask of profound, dignified disgust. She walked across the grass, followed closely by Mother Washington and the other 3 elders. They moved with the slow, deliberate pacing of a jury, preparing to deliver a guilty verdict. The few remaining guests automatically parted ways to let them through, recognizing the absolute weight of their presence. Loretta, who was still slumped in her patio chair after having the forged contract ripped from her hands, watched them approach. Her eyes widened in fresh terror, the kind of terror she had not even shown the federal agents. She cared more about her standing in the church than she cared about her own children. Losing the money was one thing, but losing her crown was her ultimate nightmare. She desperately tried to sit up straight, smoothing her wrinkled silk dress, trying to salvage some fragment of her shattered dignity. Beatrice. Loretta rasped, her voice trembling as she forced a frail, pathetic smile onto her face, reaching a shaking hand toward the approaching women. You see what is happening here. This ungrateful girl is trying to destroy our family. You know my heart, Beatrice. You know how much I have given to the ministry. You know I would never do the things she is accusing me of. This is just a misunderstanding. A terrible, awful mistake. We can fix this. Sister Beatrice stopped a few feet away from the patio table, looking down at the broken lockbox, the scattered legal documents, and finally, at Loretta, sweating, terrified face. The elder did not smile. She did not offer a comforting hand. She just stared with a cold, piercing clarity that seemed to strip away every single layer of Loretta. Expensive lies. We know exactly what you have given to the ministry, Loretta, sister, Beatrice said, her voice echoing across the quiet yard with chilling calm. It was not loud, but it carried a deadly weight, and now we know exactly whose pockets you picked to get it. You have stood at the altar for decades, preaching about family values and righteous living, while you actively plotted to steal your own granddaughter's future. You built your entire glittering empire on the broken back of a child. Loretta let out a high-pitched gasp, clutching her chest as if she had been physically struck. Beatrice, please, she begged, tears spilling over her wrinkled cheeks, ruining her carefully applied makeup. You cannot believe this nonsense. I am the head of the Women Auxiliary. I funded the new fellowship hall. My name is on the stained glass windows. I am a pillar of this community. I am a good Christian woman. Mother Washington, a stern woman who had known Loretta since they were teenagers, took a step forward, her jaw set in a hard, uncompromising line. Your name is coming down on Monday morning, Mother Washington stated firmly, her words landing like heavy stones hitting the patio. And you are officially stripped of your position on the auxiliary board. We do not want your dirty money, Loretta. And we certainly do not want your presence polluting our sanctuary. You have made a mockery of everything this community stands for. Loretta's mouth opened and closed silently, the absolute horror of her social excommunication paralyzing her completely. Her entire life had revolved around the respect and fear she commanded from these exact women, without her church titles, without the endless stream of stolen money to buy their loyalty. She was nothing but an old bitter fraud facing a federal indictment. Her social empire crumbled into dust, right in front of my eyes, falling much faster than her financial one had. She had absolutely nothing left to hide behind. No money, no power, and no prestige. "You are a disgrace to the very concept of motherhood," Sister Beatrice added, her gaze sweeping over my defeated father and then searching the yard for my mother Valerie, who was noticeably absent. "You raised weak, greedy children, and you taught them to feast on their own blood. You have reaped exactly what you have sown. Loretta May, God have mercy on whatever is left of your soul." The 5 elders turned their backs on my grandmother with perfect synchronized precision, refusing to look at her for even 1 second longer. They walked toward the side gate, their heads held high, leaving Loretta weeping hysterically in her chair, totally abandoned by the very people she had tried so desperately to impress. She reached out a shaking hand toward their retreating backs, but could not even form the words to call them back. As Sister Beatrice and Mother Washington approached the tall wooden gate leading to the driveway, a sudden loud clatter broke the heavy silence. Someone had bumped into the large metal trash cans hidden behind the side hedges. Agent Harris immediately unclipped his radio, his hand resting instinctively on his utility belt, dropping his previous calm demeanor. "Hey, stop right there!" one of the local police officers shouted, jogging quickly toward the overgrown hedges at the side of the house. I walked to the edge of the patio, looking past the departing church elders. The police officer reached into the thick green bushes and yanked someone forward by the arm, pulling them out into the bright afternoon sun. It was my mother Valerie. Her hair was tangled in the branches and her expensive silk blouse was snagged and dirty. But what caught everyone's attention was the massive, heavy black canvas duffel bag clutched desperately to her chest. The zipper on the bag had caught on a stray branch during her clumsy escape and split open halfway, spilling a glittering cascade of Loretta. Most expensive diamond necklaces, thick gold bangles, and velvet jewelry boxes straight onto the dirt. Valerie froze completely, her eyes darting frantically between the police officer gripping her arm, Agent Harris stepping off the patio, and my grandmother who was watching her own daughter-in-law, actively attempting to rob her blind during an FBI raid. The heavy silence in the yard was broken only by the sound of Valerie's frantic breathing as she stared at the glittering pile of diamonds and gold resting in the dirt. I did not hesitate. I walked straight across the grass, my shoes crunching against the fallen leaves, until I was standing directly in front of the side gate, physically blocking her only route of escape. The police officer released his grip on her arm, stepping back just enough to let Agent Harris approach. But I held my ground, keeping my eyes locked firmly on my mother. "Open the bag, Valerie!" I demanded, my voice cutting through the humid summer air with absolute authority. She flinched, clutching the black canvas closer to her chest as if her life depended on it. "Aaliyah, please," she stammered, her eyes darting wildly around the yard, searching for an ally she would never find. "These are just my personal things. They are mine. Your father bought them for me. Your grandmother gave them to me as gifts over the years. You cannot take my personal property." I took a slow, deliberate step closer, forcing her to back up against the thick green hedges, dumped the bag on the ground. "Valerie," I repeated, refusing to break eye contact, "or else I will have Agent Harris arrest you right now for the theft of federal evidence and tampering with an active crime scene." My mother let out a pathetic, high-pitched whine, her hands shaking so violently she could barely hold onto the canvas handles. Slowly, she lowered the bag to the grass, the remaining contents spilling out like a pirate treasure chest, overturned on a muddy shore. Sunlight caught the facets of diamond tennis bracelets, heavy gold chains, emerald earrings, and platinum watches all tumbling into the dirt alongside the rusted lockbox that had started this entire reckoning. "You have always been a terrible liar, Mom," I said, staring down at the fortune scattered at my feet. Do you really think I do not recognize these pieces? Let us take a walk down memory lane, shall we? I pointed to a massive diamond tennis bracelet resting near the edge of the pile you wore. That to the country club gala, during my junior year of college. You bragged to everyone that David had surprised you for your anniversary. It is funny, because that was the exact same month my tuition check bounced, and I had to take out a predatory emergency loan just to keep from being kicked out of my dorm. Valerie swallowed hard, taking another step back, her eyes welling with panicked tears. And those platinum watches. I continued gesturing toward two identical luxury timepieces glittering in the grass. Loretta bought those the same week my trust fund reported a massive unexplained loss. She claimed it was a downturn in the commercial real estate market. But the truth is, she was liquidating my assets to buy silence and loyalty from her accomplices. Every single diamond, every gold watch, every precious stone in that bag was purchased with money, stolen directly from my inheritance. They do not belong to you. They never belong to you. They belong to the estate. You cannot do this to me, Valerie sobbed, her voice cracking as she looked down at the wealth she was losing forever. I am your mother. I gave birth to you. I raised you. You are leaving me with nothing. Aaliyah, I will be ruined. I will be a laughingstock at the club. I will not even be able to show my face in town without my jewelry. I am nothing. Then you are nothing, I replied, my voice entirely devoid of mercy. You traded your daughter for shiny rocks and country club gossip. You stood by and watched Loretta destroy my future, and you gladly accepted the blood money to fund your lavish lifestyle. You have nothing left because you built your entire existence on a foundation of theft and lies. Agent Harris stepped forward, signaling to the police officer secure those items as evidence of wire fraud and asset embezzlement. The agent instructed his voice. Pure business. The officer immediately began pulling clear plastic evidence bags from his tactical vest, kneeling down in the dirt to catalog the scattered jewelry. Valerie let out a gut-wrenching wail, dropping to her knees in the grass. She reached out, trying to grab one last gold chain before the officer could bag it. But Agent Harris stepped firmly between her and the jewelry. His stern look forcing her to pull her hands back, she collapsed onto the dirt, weeping hysterically. Her perfect hair ruined her expensive clothes, stained her entire identity. Stripped away in a matter of seconds, she was finally experiencing the exact kind of devastating loss she had happily watched me suffer for years. I turned away from her pathetic display and looked back toward the patio, where the true architect of this nightmare was watching her empire turn to dust. Loretta was still sitting in her chair, but she no longer looked like the venomous snake she had been just minutes ago. The public humiliation from the church elders, the arrest of her corporate golden boy Trent, the utter failure of her forged contract, and now the sight of her daughter-in-law attempting to steal her remaining wealth and being caught by the FBI. It was too much. The absolute reality of her destruction was crashing down on her all at once. I watched her face lose all its color, turning an ashen, sickly gray. Her breathing became shallow and rapid, her hands gripping the armrests of her patio chair so tightly, her knuckles were stark white. She tried to speak, to shout another command, to issue another threat, but the words died in her throat. Suddenly she lurched forward, letting out a sharp, agonizing gasp. Her right hand flew up to clutch the center of her chest, her fingers digging desperately into the silk fabric of her dress. Her eyes bulged wide with genuine terror, staring blankly at the glass table in front of her. She was not pretending anymore. She was not putting on a performance for sympathy or trying to manipulate the room. The sheer overwhelming stress of losing absolutely everything she had stolen was triggering a massive biological response. Aaliyah! My father yelled, his voice cracking with fresh panic as he scrambled up from the patio stones and ran toward his mother. Mom, what is wrong? Loretta could not answer. She let out a strangled wheezing sound, her body seizing violently before she slumped entirely, sliding off the expensive patio chair and crashing onto the hard stone pavers. Her cane clattered loudly against the table as she hit the ground, her body twitching as she gasped for air, clutching her chest in pure, undeniable agony. The grand matriarch of the Wilson family had finally reached the end of her reign, collapsing in the ruins of her stolen empire. Agent Harris immediately reached for his radio dispatch. "We need a medical transport unit at this location, immediately. We have an elderly female experiencing a severe cardiac event." I stood perfectly still in the grass, listening to my father scream for help as he knelt beside the woman who had ruined my life, watching as the ambulance sirens began to wail in the distance, signaling the final absolute death of the Wilson legacy. The wailing of the sirens grew deafening as the heavy white ambulance reversed violently up our long, manicured driveway, crushing the pristine edges of my mother-prized rose bushes. The heavy tires tearing deep, muddy trenches into the perfectly manicured lawn that my grandmother had obsessed over for 2 decades. The flashing red and blue lights painted the ruined patio in a chaotic strobe, casting long, erratic shadows across the stone pavers. 2 paramedics rushed through the wooden side gate, pushing a heavy yellow stretcher, their boots trampling right over the scattered diamonds and gold chains my mother had just tried to steal. My father was still kneeling on the ground, hovering uselessly over Loretta. Shivering frame, his hands hovering in the air, afraid to actually touch her mom. "Just hold on," he blubbered, his voice a pathetic, high-pitched whine. "They are here, they are going to fix you." The paramedics shoved him aside without a second glance, dropping their heavy medical bags onto the glass table next to the rusted lockbox, scattering the remaining forged documents into the damp grass. They moved with practiced urgency, ignoring the sheer magnitude of the wealth and destruction surrounding them. They immediately went to work, tearing open Loretta's silk designer collar to attach sticky cardiac monitor pads to her chest. The sudden jolt of an oxygen mask being strapped over her face seemed to momentarily shock Loretta back into a fragile state of consciousness. Her eyes fluttered open, the sheer terror in them momentarily replaced by her deeply ingrained arrogance. Her perfectly manicured fingernails scraping against the plastic as she fought for breath. Her face was still an alarming shade of gray, but the sheer force of her ego demanded one final display of superiority. She reached up with a trembling hand, weakly pushing the plastic oxygen mask away from her mouth. "Cedar Crest," she gasped, her voice nothing more than a wet, ragged wheeze, but still dripping with absolute entitlement. "Take me to the Cedar Crest Private Pavilion. Dr. Sterling is my personal concierge physician. Call him immediately. Tell him I require the executive recovery suite, the one with the private chef and the ocean view. I will not be treated like a common street vagrant by you people." The older paramedic frowned, exchanging a quick, confused glance with his partner. "Mom, you are experiencing a severe cardiac event," he said firmly, pressing the mask back onto her face. "We need to transport you to the nearest available emergency room. We do not have time for private clinic requests." Loretta violently shook her head, knocking the mask askew again. "I do not go to public hospitals," she hissed, her face turning a dangerous shade of pale purple. "I am Loretta Wilson. I am a platinum-tier patient. I pay $50,000 a year for premium elite coverage. You will take me to Cedar Crest right now, or I will have your jobs." I walked slowly across the patio, the stone pavers cold beneath my shoes, until I was standing directly over her fallen form. I looked down at the woman who had terrorized me for my entire existence, watching her cling to her ridiculous social status, even as her heart was literally failing her. "She is not going to Cedar Crest," I announced, my voice slicing through the chaotic noise of the radios and the shouting police officers calmly echoing across the yard. "She does not have a concierge physician anymore, and her platinum-tier insurance coverage was officially terminated at exactly 9 o'clock this morning." Loretta's eyes widened in absolute horror, staring up at me as if I were the Grim Reaper himself. "What?" She choked out a single word filled with pure dread. "That premium healthcare plan you love so much was funded entirely by the trust," I explained, crossing my arms over my chest. "You spent $50,000 a year of my inheritance just so you could sip cucumber water in private waiting rooms and brag to the church elders about your exclusive medical care. You stole my money to buy yourself luxury doctors while you completely ignored my own medical needs. Do you remember when I was 19 and I begged you for help paying my dental bills because my wisdom teeth were impacted and I was in so much pain I could barely speak? I continued staring down into her terrified eyes. The infections were so bad, I was running a dangerous fever, and I could not even eat solid food. I was working 3 miserable minimum wage jobs just to survive, and I still could not afford the copay. You told me to go to a free clinic and wait in line because you claimed the family business was going through a tough quarter. You let me suffer for weeks while you were getting thousands of dollars in elective cosmetic procedures billed directly to my stolen trust fund. Well, the free ride is officially over, I said, stepping back to give the paramedics room. The forensic accountants flagged your premium health insurance as a fraudulent use of estate assets. The policy is dead, Loretta. You do not have a dime to your name to pay for Cedar Crest. The older paramedic did not hesitate. He looked at his partner and nodded. Strap her in. We are routing to County General. County General was the chronically underfunded, overcrowded public hospital on the east side of the city. It was the exact place Loretta had spent decades mocking, claiming it was dirty and filled with criminals. She had once fired a housekeeper just for suggesting the woman had to go there for a checkup. The very idea of lying in a hallway bed at County General was a fate worse than death for a woman obsessed with elite status. She had spent her entire adult life insulating herself from the struggles of regular people, building a fortress of stolen wealth to guarantee she would never have to experience a single moment of discomfort. And now the very system she despised was going to be the only thing keeping her alive. No. Loretta wailed a terrible, desperate sound that was immediately muffled by the oxygen mask. My father grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my sleeve. Aaliyah, please. He begged, his face wet with tears. You cannot let them take her to county. It is filthy there. She will not survive it. She needs private care. You have the money now. Pay for it. Please, just pay for her room. I ripped my arm out of his grasp so violently he stumbled backward. You better get in the ambulance with her, David, I replied coldly, because neither of you will ever see a single cent of my money again. You enabled her greed, and now you get to sit with her in a crowded waiting room at the county hospital while she faces reality. The paramedics lifted the stretcher, Loretta thrashing weakly against the yellow straps as they wheeled her rapidly across the dirt and loaded her into the back of the waiting ambulance. My father chased after them, scrambling into the back of the vehicle just before the heavy white doors slammed shut, leaving my mother completely alone in the dirt, still surrounded by the jewelry she had tried to steal. No one even looked back at Valerie. Not her husband, not her mother-in-law. Her own greed had isolated her completely from the family she had prized over her own daughter. The sirens wailed to life once more, the flashing lights pulling away down the street, carrying the ruined matriarch toward the exact miserable fate she had always deemed beneath her. The yard suddenly felt incredibly still, the heavy summer heat settling over the patio like a suffocating blanket. The local police were finishing up with my mother crying silently into her hands as she realized her life of luxury was completely over. I watched the ambulance disappear around the corner, feeling a deep, profound sense of finality closing the chapter on the people who had tried to break me. A shadow fell over the grass next to me. Agent Harris stepped up to my side, his tactical gear rustling slightly in the quiet air. He held a thick, digital tablet in his hands, his eyes scanning the data, scrolling across the glowing screen, before he looked up and locked his sharp, professional gaze on me. We have officially frozen all of her accounts, Mrs. Wilson, he said, his voice steady and low. I nodded, slowly processing the absolute finality of his words. The entire financial fortress that Loretta had built, using my stolen inheritance, was completely locked down. No more hidden offshore accounts, no more secret trust disbursements, no more luxury safety nets for the people who had thrived on my misery. Agent Harris gave me a curt, professional nod and turned back to his team. stepping away to coordinate the final stages of the evidence collection. The patio was finally clearing out, the chaotic flashing lights of the emergency vehicles fading into the distance, leaving behind a heavy, humid afternoon silence. The heavy front doors of the mansion slowly clicked open, drawing my attention away from the ruined yard. Jasmine walked out onto the pristine stone steps, dragging a single black rolling suitcase behind her. The rhythmic clacking of the small plastic wheels echoing loudly in the deafening quiet of the driveway. She looked absolutely nothing like the arrogant golden child who had sneered at me just a few hours ago. Her expensive designer makeup was streaked with dried tears. Her perfect hair was a tangled mess, and her shoulders were slumped under the invisible crushing weight of her completely destroyed reality. Down by the wrought iron front gates, the local police were forcefully shoving Trent into the back of a black and white cruiser. He was still thrashing against the officers, his custom-tailored suit stained with patio dirt, and his face twisted into a pathetic mask of pure desperation. When he saw Jasmine standing on the porch, he stopped fighting the officers and threw his entire body weight against the side of the police car, his handcuffed wrists slamming violently against the metal doorframe. "Jasmine!" he screamed, his voice cracking with pure pathetic panic echoing across the sweeping lawn. "Jasmine, look at me. You have to call Arthur. You have to call the board. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. Call my lawyers. Jasmine, get the legal team on the phone right now. You cannot let them do this to me. Do not just stand there. You have to fix this." The officers grabbed him roughly by the shoulders, forcing his head down to shove him into the back seat. But Trent kept twisting his neck, his wild, bloodshot eyes locked on his wife, begging her to save the corporate kingdom that was already reduced to ashes. Jasmine stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, her hand tightly gripping the handle of her single suitcase. She stared at the man she had married for his money and his status, watching him weep like a broken child in the back of a police cruiser. She did not yell back. She did not pull out her phone to call his precious legal team. She did not even offer him a single word of comfort or reassurance. The absolute reality of her situation had finally broken through her lifelong delusion. She knew Trent had absolutely no money left to pay a legal defense. She knew Apex Capital had completely disowned him and frozen his shares. She knew her grandmother, the woman who had spent decades protecting her and funding her unearned lifestyle, was currently lying in a crowded county hospital ward, facing massive federal fraud indictments. Jasmine slowly turned her head away from her screaming husband. The golden child of the Wilson family had finally run out of people to manipulate. She had no career, no savings of her own, and absolutely no identity outside of the unearned luxury she had always believed was her birthright. She looked down at the driveway, the expensive stones beneath her feet, feeling the cold, hard truth that she was walking away with absolutely nothing but the clothes on her back, and whatever pathetic remnants of her wardrobe she could fit into that single bag. The police cruiser doors slammed shut, cutting off Trent, frantic screaming. The engine roared to life and the car pulled away, slipping through the massive iron gates and turning down the street, taking away the last shred of Jasmine. Perfect false reality. I watched her walk slowly down the long, winding driveway, the wheels of her suitcase clicking rhythmically against the pavement, the sound marking the definitive end of her reign. She did not look at me. She did not try to offer a fake apology or beg for my forgiveness, the way my father had done. She just kept her head down, her posture radiating total defeat. She walked past the manicured hedges, past the empty spots where her husband's luxury cars used to be parked, passing through the towering front gates, and stepping out onto the public sidewalk completely alone, disappearing into a world that would no longer cater to her every whim. Realizing that the friends she used to buy drinks for would not answer her calls now that her accounts were frozen, I turned around and walked back into the house. The grand foyer was suffocatingly quiet, the kind of deep, heavy silence that only follows a massive, devastating storm. The chaos of the FBI raid and the medical emergency had completely evaporated, leaving behind the hollow, empty shell of a stolen empire. The sunlight streamed through the massive front windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. highlighting the absolute emptiness of the space. I walked slowly up the grand sweeping staircase, my footsteps muffled by the thick expensive carpet, making my way toward the master wing of the house. The door to my parents' bedroom was wide open. I stopped in the doorway, leaning silently against the dark wood frame, watching the final pathetic act of their false supremacy unfold in front of me. David and Valerie were moving around the massive bedroom in complete and utter silence. The frantic, arrogant energy they had displayed all morning was entirely gone, replaced by a suffocating, terrible dread. Valerie was haphazardly throwing wrinkled blouses and slacks into a large leather trunk, her hands still trembling violently from the humiliation of being caught stealing by the federal agents. She had no jewelry left to pack, no diamond necklaces, no heavy gold watches. Her wrists and neck were completely bare, matching the utter emptiness of her impending future. She was crying silently, tears ruining her expensive silk shirt as she mourned the loss of her country club status and her endless shopping sprees. My father was methodically folding his custom-tailored shirts, his face pale and sunken. He looked like a ghost, haunting his own life, moving with the slow, mechanical precision of a man who knew he was walking straight toward a cliff. He did not look at Valerie, and she did not look at him. The foundation of their marriage, built entirely on stolen money and shared cowardice, had collapsed completely, leaving them as two strangers trapped in a sinking ship with absolutely no lifeboats in sight. He knew his cowardly attempt to play the hero on the patio had failed, and now he had to face the reality of his own pathetic existence. Neither of them noticed me standing in the doorway. They were too consumed by their own miserable reality, too busy packing the pathetic remnants of their fake lives, knowing they only had 30 days before the sheriff forcibly removed them from the property. They had never earned, they had traded their daughter to maintain this illusion, and now the illusion was gone, leaving them with absolutely nothing to show for their lifelong betrayal. I reached into the pocket of my jacket and pulled out the heavy brass ring of master keys. The keys that unlocked every single door, every security gate, every hidden safe in the entire Wilson real estate portfolio. The cold metal felt heavy and permanent in the palm of my hand, a tangible symbol of the legacy I had finally reclaimed from the people who tried to bury me. I did not say a word to my parents. I did not need to offer them any more explanations or listen to their empty apologies. The time for talking had ended the moment the federal judge authenticated my grandfather. True will, they were officially irrelevant, ghosts lingering in a house that no longer belonged to them. I turned away from their bedroom, leaving them to pack their bags in the heavy, suffocating silence of their own making. I walked down the long corridor, feeling the absolute quiet of the massive mansion wrap around me. It was not a lonely silence. It was a triumphant one, standing alone in the grand hallway, holding the master keys tightly in my hand. I finally owned my empire. 6 months later, the air around the Wilson estate was no longer filled with the suffocating scent of Loretta, expensive perfumes, or the quiet whispers of her country club friends. Instead, it was filled with the deafening roar of heavy diesel engines and the mechanical grinding of construction equipment. I stood on the freshly poured concrete of what used to be the grand patio, wearing a hard hat and a high-visibility vest over my tailored suit, watching an enormous yellow excavator dig its steel teeth deep into the earth. It was tearing up the massive ancient oak tree that had anchored the center of the backyard for 40 years. The very same tree Loretta used to brag about to everyone who visited, claiming it represented the deep, unshakable roots of the Wilson family legacy. The thick roots were stubborn, clinging desperately to the soil, just like she had clung to her stolen wealth. But the machine was relentless with one final, agonizing crack of splitting timber. The excavator ripped the massive stump completely out of the ground, scattering dirt across the yard, and leaving a massive gaping hole where the ultimate pride of the Wilson Empire used to stand. I did not move into the mansion after the federal courts officially transferred the deed into my name. The idea of sleeping in those cold, empty rooms surrounded by the ghosts of my family, greed made my skin crawl. The house was far too large for one person and far too tainted to ever be a home, so I brought in a team of commercial architects and gutted the entire interior, stripping away the imported Italian marble, the crystal chandeliers, and the mahogany wall panels. We tore down the walls of the grand dining room where my family used to plot my downfall and replaced them with modern floor-to-ceiling glass partitions. The estate was no longer a monument to unearned wealth and fraudulent prestige. It was now the official campus for the Cyber Sleuth Foundation, a fully funded immersive technology and coding academy exclusively dedicated to educating underprivileged Black girls from the inner city. The very same neighborhoods Loretta used to roll her windows up when driving through were now sending their brightest young minds to learn Python, ethical hacking, and cybersecurity right in her former master suite. The cavernous living room where my parents had shamelessly begged for my forgiveness was now a state-of-the-art server lab filled with rows of sleek black computers and interactive whiteboards. Every single penny of the recovered trust fund that Loretta had not managed to squander went directly into an irrevocable endowment to keep the academy running forever. She had spent her entire life hoarding resources, stepping on the backs of her own blood to buy herself a seat among the elite. Now her sacred fortress was a place of actual empowerment, building the exact kind of brilliant, independent women she had always tried to crush. The irony was beautiful and absolute, turning her monument to vanity into an engine of opportunity. I handed my clipboard back to the site foreman, giving him a final nod of approval before walking away from the construction zone and climbing into the back of my waiting town car. The drive back into the heart of the city gave me time to clear my head, watching the sprawling suburban estates fade into towering glass skyscrapers. 40 minutes later, I stepped out of the private elevator and walked into my own high-rise corner office. The heavy glass doors bore the sleek silver logo of Cyber Sleuth Forensics, the digital security firm I had built entirely from the ground up, using my own intelligence and my own relentless drive. The firm had exploded in massive growth after the highly publicized downfall of Apex Capital, and the subsequent federal indictments of Trent and Loretta corporate clients were practically begging to hire the brilliant auditor who had single-handedly dismantled a multi-million-dollar fraud syndicate from the inside out. I had more business than I could handle employing a staff of 30 top-tier analysts who worked for me. I walked over to my massive desk, dropping my leather briefcase onto the polished surface and picking up my freshly brewed cup of black coffee as I took a slow sip. The screen of my smartphone lit up silently on the desk. The caller ID simply read blocked number. It was the fourth time this week they had tried to reach me. My parents, David and Valerie, were currently living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city, completely cut off from the country club circle they had once ruled. Without Loretta's stolen money to fund their lavish lifestyle, and with their reputations entirely radioactive, they had been reduced to working entry-level retail jobs just to make rent. Their cars had been repossessed, their country club memberships revoked, and their so-called friends had completely abandoned them. The moment the FBI press release went public, they had absolutely nothing left but each other, and the overwhelming, crushing regret of choosing the wrong side. I knew exactly what the voicemail would sound like. David offering more pathetic, empty apologies, trying to appeal to my sense of family loyalty. Valerie weeping softly in the background, begging for a second chance, pleading for just a small loan to help them get back on their feet, hoping my new wealth would somehow trickle down to save them from their self-inflicted misery. They wanted salvation from the very daughter they had tried to bury alive. I did not even bother to silence the phone. I just let it ring, watching the screen light up and fade to black, all on its own. They were strangers to me now, ghosts of a past life I had completely shed. I had no anger left for them, no lingering resentment to tie me to their pathetic existence. They were simply irrelevant, erased from my narrative the moment they chose money over my future. I turned my back on the silent phone and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the sprawling city skyline. The afternoon sun was reflecting off the glass towers, casting a warm, golden light over the streets below. For years, I thought justice would look like a courtroom verdict or a screaming match in a driveway. I thought revenge was about destroying the people who had hurt you, watching them suffer the way they made you suffer. But standing in my own corner office, looking at the empire I had built with my own two hands, I realized the truth. The ultimate sweet revenge was not just watching them lose everything, it was building a life so high and so untouchable that they could never reach me again. I took another sip of my coffee, feeling the quiet, absolute peace of a woman who had finally won her freedom, stepping out of the shadows of the Wilson legacy and casting a brilliant, blinding light of my own